Okay, great. All right. So welcome to the XCAP meeting. I am going to turn it over to Sarah to call the roll for us, and then we'll move on.
Okie doke. Gregory Braille.
He just
I'm
popped
here.
in. He's here.
Okay. Phil Burton.
Here.
Tony Carrasco.
Not yet.
In-Young Cho.
Not yet.
Megan Kahn.
Here.
Larry Klein.
Here.
Pat Lau, probably not, right?
I'm not sure, but let's have it. She's excused.
Okay. Adina Levin.
Not yet.
Not here. Nadia Nayak.
Here.
Keith Reckdahl.
Not yet.
Okay. Dave Shen.
Here.
Carrie Templeton.
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right. I'm going to open it up to oral communications. It looks like we've got two folks who have their hand up so far. I'm going to give each of you 2 minutes, and I will ask. I'm not sure who from the city is doing the time clock for me here, but in my appreciation, my thanks in advance, and I will turn it over to the clock person.
Hello, Ruchika, are you there? I think we were going to have you do this part, but thank you for joining us today. I've got 2 people with their hands raised.
I see 4.
Hi, Nate. I'm here. I'm sorry. I was having a tough time unmuting myself. I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, we see four members of the public who would like to speak at this oral communications. I have Eduardo, first name Eduardo and last name Lack. You can unmute yourself. Mr. Eduardo, can you hear us?
Eduardo, can you hear us? It looks like you're muted. If you unmute yourself, you
Yes,
have 2 minutes.
the pop-up just came up.
Okay.
Sorry, the pop-up didn't come up before. I was like, where is it? Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Eduardo Jack. I live at 36 Churchill, and I am going to be proposing the Churchill closure, but more importantly, the Oregon Embarcadero mitigation measures. So first of all, I want to thank you guys. The 77-page analysis is amazing and impressive. And given the current reality of the impacted city, county, and state budgets, I believe that we should be looking at cost-effective analysis, benefit analysis across the whole city. As I said, I live in Churchill, and I've had 4 kids go to Palo. I live with Churchill and the danger it presents to students, kids, and neighbors. But yet, as a citizen of Palo Alto, I want the best solution for the whole city, north, south, east, and west. And based on the analysis of AECOM and all of the additional traffic research, it is clear that the Oregon Embarcadero mitigation measures with the closure of Churchill is the best and most cost-effective solution for the whole city. Page 18's chart outlines the clear benefits to the city. Traffic in Churchill is 70% through traffic that is easily managed by the Oregon and Embarcadero cost-effective mitigation measures that are outlined in pages 53 to 57. So great job on that. The through traffic on Churchill has caused accidents and deaths on Churchill. I personally have seen a car hit by a train. Thankfully, there was a guard at the time that got everybody off the car seconds before the train hit the car and sent it flying. My neighbor, Aline, was struck by a speeding car. My triathlon teammate lost her son to a train. And there have been countless pets killed on Churchill. So let's get the best value and the best, safest solution recommended to the City Council. And again, thank you for the great work you guys have done.
Thank you, Eduardo. Our next speaker is Kathy Jordan. You can unmute yourself and begin to talk now.
Okay, sorry, the unmute just arrived. To the XCAP committee, thank you for your work. I'd like to note that I and my neighbors on the eastern part of Embarcadero Road oppose closing the Churchill Avenue grade crossing and oppose sending an additional 7,000 cars to Embarcadero Road, which merely transfers traffic and congestion to another part of the city, which is in opposition to the City Council's already adopted goals and guidelines for grade crossing recommendations. I'd like to ask the XCAP to step back on this process, given the following facts. In my opinion, Caltrain's business plan assumptions were questionable pre-COVID, projecting to triple ridership, when in fact, its ridership had declined in 2 of the previous 3 years. Now, these ridership projections are completely out of touch with reality, and the service levels called for, the same. Caltrain is currently pleading poverty, claims that it needs funds just to stay alive. It will have quite a time just getting back to its levels of pre-COVID ridership. Planning for and working to obtain funds for expensive and divisive grade crossings to help implement service levels that aren't supported by ridership projections doesn't make financial or any other sense. In the Bay Area, mass transit has actually shown declining ridership, down 5% since 1980, even as the Bay Area population increased 50%. This isn't surprising, as data reflects that 19% more jobs within the Bay Area can be accessed by driving for 20 minutes rather than transit and walking for 60 minutes. As we know, remote working is a trend that is likely to accelerate. Post-COVID, pre-COVID, it surpassed mass transit use in the United States. So the prospect of following through on a plan to invest $22 billion in a mode that has declining ridership seems the height of folly. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jason Matloff. Please feel free to unmute yourself and you can begin to speak now.
Hi, this is Jason Matloff. It seems that we are continuing to do the ping pong back and forth between neighborhoods, and I'm not going to rehash the past except to just briefly say we know from the traffic studies that all the traffic problems originate from Embarcadero Road and northward. It's the arterial road in the area, and we need to fix the known, very, very well-known problem that everybody experiences anecdotally, and now we have the very clear data from the Hexagon traffic study that that's where the problem is. But I don't want to go over that. What I would just ask the XCAP to consider is, just take a step back, given where we are in this COVID crisis. The state is now talking about tens of billions of dollars of budget deficit, and the city is now talking about up to $40 to $50 million of budget deficit. So what I would urge the XCAP to consider is the most cost-effective way we can solve the traffic, the rail traversal problem in the city. The most cost-effective way, the biggest bang for the buck that we can get. And any objective analysis will show very clearly that the $50 million spent on the Embarcadero mitigations and the Oregon Expressway mitigations is by far and away the biggest bang for the buck. So given what's going on and the fact that this is going to have to go towards a vote for city indebtedness, I urge you to come up with a proposal that is viable given the economic circumstances that surround us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sean He. You are, please feel free to unmute yourself and you can begin to speak now.
Hi, my name is Sean He. I actually live close to the Almond Churchill intersection, and similar to Eduardo, I've seen multiple accidents there, but I think something that we aren't talking about is the roads that and intersections, or I guess the turn onto Churchill, is also prone to these same accidents. I've seen people, students lining up to make the turn on the Churchill to cross the tracks, and sometimes they get into accidents there, among other high school antics. So I think closing Churchill will kind of save a lot of our students from some of these possible accidents. And if we could save one life by doing this, I'm all for it, right? And I've attended a lot of these meetings when they're in person. I've also attended or listened to some of the recordings as well. And I know there's a lot of good ideas out there, and some include the upgrades to some of the other crossings, which is Embarcadero and Oregon. So, if we could close Churchill, I would say, hey, let's start supporting those upgrades, those other intersections. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeff Greenfield. Please feel free to unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Thank you. I'm Jeff Greenfield. I live on Waverly Street off of East Meadow, so close to the Meadow and not so far away from the Charleston crossings. I thank you, all of you, for your efforts and creative ideas and specific information. The detailed effort you're providing is really helpful. I'm hopeful that the partial underpass solutions at Meadow and Charleston can be cleaned up so they will work effectively and be supported. A few specific ideas, I think increase or extending the bike and pedestrian access along the south side of Meadow so that a separated bike lane extends all the way to JLS school would be very helpful, a very simple and effective solution. It's an ideal place for a separated bike lane since there's no residences on that side of the street, just street crossings. I think it would help to increase the turn options, especially at Meadow. There's only 3 turn options available there. I don't know if adding a small, I see there's no roundabout added, a single lane roundabout at Emerson or Ramona perhaps could help, or adding turn options off of Alma as it approaches the grocery outlet to turn in, or something would be helpful. Also, I don't understand on the Charleston design whether the turn onto Eli Place is blocked off. That seems problematic. So just providing better access for people to get in and out. For example, for the Ventura neighborhood to get to turn onto East Meadow and then be able to turn onto Alma, at least going south, would be helpful. Anyway, I appreciate the effort you're doing. Please focus on workable solutions that the community can understand and hopefully support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Arnott Bolins. Please feel free to unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hello, my name is Arnott Bolins, and I live in Midtown and use Churchill Avenue quite regularly. I already sent an email also to the committee with some design recommendations on bicycle and pedestrian tunnels. Yeah, I guess I would just like to thank the EXCAP committee for all the work they've been doing already, and I would like to argue in favor of a more pedestrian and bicycle-centered approach. So this would mean a bicycle tunnel at Churchill instead of Kellogg, just because then it's a straight tunnel and it will be a much safer solution. And considering the huge amount of cyclists at Churchill, yeah, I hope you'll be able to avoid things like the situation at California Avenue, and also the Embarcadero crossing is quite bad for pedestrians and cyclists. So yeah, I would like to argue for cycling paths that are straight, no blind corners, are wide enough to handle the amount of bikes, and also I would like to argue in favor of an additional sidewalk for pedestrians of at least 3 feet, so quite a bit wider than the Homer tunnel. And I think that would increase safety for pedestrians and cyclists a lot in the city of Palo Alto, and might even encourage more people to cycle, especially considering a lot of people are hesitant about taking public transit right now. So additional cycling options and people feeling safe doing that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Penny Elson. Please feel free to unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So I want to first of all agree with the comments by the two previous speakers, Jeff Greenfield and Arnout. And I want to just ask a couple of questions. Given the results of the level of service analysis, I'm wondering if anybody considered the possibility of a 1-lane roundabout on Charleston. I think there's a lot of concern in the neighborhoods about this 2-lane roundabout, and I was interested to see how well the roundabout performed. So I think that might be something worth looking at. And also, I think that given the VTA bus service reductions and shuttle cuts, we can expect an increase in the number of students who are going to be walking and biking, and some of them driven to school. You know, if we build it, they come. We know that. We've seen that. So let's make sure we build this right so that kids can choose to walk and bike to school if they want to. And then finally, I'm a little frustrated, to be frank, about the lack of clarity. I'm disappointed, first of all, that comments that were given in previous iterations about the very sharp turns at the Churchill, in the Churchill option, but also the lack of clarity in the pedestrian bicycle facilities in the East Meadow and Charleston renderings make it very difficult for even somebody like me who's used to looking at these things to understand how it's going to work. That really needs to be improved before it goes to city council, or honestly, it goes further along. We give the school district a lot of trouble for not including bike ped facilities early in their planning process when they're doing development. I'd love to see the city set a great example with these important projects. Thanks.
Thank you, Penny.
Thank
I just
you.
wanted to remind the speakers that while we appreciate the feedback of where this is for items not on the agenda, so it'd be great if you could hold anything that relates to the Meadow Charleston conversation, or later if the traffic study, when it comes to that section, that'd be super helpful. Okay, go ahead. Thanks, Ruchika.
Thank you. Our next speaker is with the screen name Neva Yarkin. Please feel free to unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Okay, my family has owned this Churchill property for over 60 years. And I can tell you that this small 7-block residential street has changed a lot since 1960. I have a few points that I'd like to make. First, according to the transportation and city manager, Caltrains is unlikely or reluctant to consider giving the city any rights to their right of way, which would prevent the current version of the partial underpass from being constructed as proposed. If that is the case, then why are we still discussing it as an option? Another major problem for any alternative train option, who is going to pay for this? The partial underpass at the Churchill Quarter was estimated to have a ballpark cost of 150 million plus. Where is that money going to come from if Palo Alto has a deficit of 40 million and California has a deficit of $54 billion? Our new lives have changed because of the coronavirus. Train ridership has decreased and may continue to decrease. I would feel very unsafe taking a train now, or any time in the future. And I'm sure I'm not alone. People are struggling, even in Palo Alto, financially and with other disruptions to their previous lives. Who would ask the business community or the citizens of Palo Alto to foot the bill for train crossings at this time? It seems like it's time to reassess the work and options considered by XCAP. Thank you for all your commitment and for all your work. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Brian Kilgore. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hi, this is Brian. Thanks for all your effort. I'll be brief. I had a couple of comments. One, the meadow crossing, or all these crossings, I'm very much in favor of keeping the train at grade or below grade. So I look forward to more work on the underpasses. With respect to the meadow crossing, I note that the proposed pedestrian bikeway is 20 feet wide, which is great. It's kind of wide, but I'll note that the new bike bridge that's supposed to come up in South Palo Alto is 12 feet wide. And so I wonder if narrowing the pedestrian bike bridge path under Alma Meadow might allow for the apartment building on the corner of Meadow and Alma to retain its driveway and maintain, and still be an apartment. And my second point, the comment in previous caller touched on this, is the traffic circle proposed on Charleston. To me, seems huge. I mean, it's 2 lanes, it's very large. I think it's great, except for the property takings. And I would suggest redesigning it as a 1-lane traffic circle, see how that goes, or even possibly cutting it out since it's not absolutely required for the underpass, and if needed, could be added later. That's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Yoriko Kishimoto. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Yes. Yes, my name is Yoriko Kishimoto, former mayor and also resident on Embarcadero at Bryant. So yes, thank you all for your very hard work on this. My big message is thinking about Palo Alto's long-term future post-COVID. I mean, I think all the clear priority should be on bike pads network in Palo Alto. That priority in terms of dollars, priority in terms of kind of the best routes and the right-of-way, sharing the right-of-way. So I strongly support consideration of the price plan and the 1-lane roundabout in South Palo Alto. And I wish that XCAP would make a strong recommendation to the City Council that we move forward with these bike pads improvements regardless of the schedule for grade separations. And also, as the comp plan states clearly, that we keep the roads open. We don't kind of make more cul-de-sacs and more expressways in Palo Alto, that we keep the network more walkable. So I think that's it. So I really appreciate everybody's very thoughtful consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Terry Lack. Please unmute yourself and begin to talk now.
Hi, everybody. I guess everyone said thank you, and I was going to do it too, but I will do it anyway, even though everyone said the same thing. I can't believe the size and the amount of work, the size of the reports and the amount of work that goes into what you guys have to look at to make these decisions. And, clearly it's a big decision. And a lot of people have a lot of points. Bottom line is we got to do what's best long term. And it seems that the report is very clear and the analysis is pretty impressive that the mitigations on Oregon and Embarcadero are going to make things a lot safer and better in Palo Alto. They're going to help with the Churchill closing. And I say the Churchill closing, being optimistic that that's what we'll do. I live on Churchill. It is a neighborhood street. It's always meant to be a neighborhood street, and it's not safe with the 70% of the cars that just drive through it at high speeds. And I've seen 2 of my cats killed in front of my eyes. And the people didn't even stop. The drivers didn't even stop because they're so busy getting across. So I think with the kids going to school at Palo, with the mitigations in Oregon and Embarcadero, you have a clear solution here that isn't going to cost multiple millions of dollars. And I really, really hope that that's the direction we go. It's going to be safer for everybody involved, everybody in Southgate and everybody going to school and our pets. And look, I'm ahead of time. How about that? Thank you all.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Khurshid Gandhi. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now. Our next speaker is Khurshid Gandhi. Can you hear us?
Sorry, I didn't mean
Yes.
to raise my hand. It must have been an error. Please carry on.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Our next speaker is Rachel Kellerman. Feel free to unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hello, thank you. And I hope everyone is safe and well. And thank you for all your hard work. We should make sure that everybody, that all the bike ped lanes are safe and that we don't sacrifice one bike ped lane for safety of others, because we really need to make sure that the plan includes bike and pedestrian safety in all the routes, even the existing routes. So we who live on the north side of Embarcadero, right near the bike path, the busy bike path that Bryant Kingsley to Pali, where I worked at Pali and I walked that all the time. I've spoken to you before. I'm just wanting to make sure that everybody understands that that is a really busy bike ped route. And the mitigation plan right now drives traffic onto the 1100 block of Emerson, which runs perpendicular to that route. And so the safety of the kids on that route are going to be imperiled if the mitigation plan stands. So it should be a win-win for everybody. I don't think anyone would disagree. So when you make your recommendations, please make sure that there is further work done on that busy bike ped path. You know, we need the safety for everybody across Palo Alto to be paramount. Thank you again for your hard work.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sandeep Bhel. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My name is Sandeep Bal. I live on Edley Avenue near the Charleston Meadow intersections. I would like to thank the committee for the work they're doing and would also like to speak in favor of the rail trench as opposed to the underpass at Charleston and Meadow. And the reason is the underpass will not be compatible with the neighborhood because it will be extensive from what I've read about it and extend way too far and be very industrial looking. The underpass will be unfriendly to families, students, the bike and school corridor, and be aggressive and invasive to the neighborhood. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Patrice Benel. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hello, this is Patrice Benal and Michael Wessel. We live at the intersection of East Charleston Road and Mumford Place. So in the current plans, we see that there are two proposed roundabouts, and the location of these roundabouts is currently ambiguous. So it might either be in the Mumford East Charleston Road intersection, or it might be 2 blocks before that. So we would like to ask the council to make sure that these alternatives are being clarified as quickly as possible. And also, it is a very invasive thing to do in a neighborhood. So we understand that the main reason for these roundabouts is in order to enable right turns from Alma into left turns from Alma into West Charleston Road into the underpass. So we were wondering why it is not possible to design some kind of left turn from Alma into West Charleston Road using the underpass. If there is not some kind of traffic light, we see that in the plan there are concrete walls probably needed to supports the train tracks, but maybe there are alternatives. Thank you.
My bigger concern is what this does to the complex of our neighborhood. This is a very intimate community, so having something, particularly a double-laned roundabout going into a community, this not only impacts the beginning of Charleston from Alma to Mumford, but 1 block away are community centers, the library, elder communities, 6 different schools. This cannot be made into a freeway. Making it minimally a single lane at the roundabout does one thing which is wonderful and something you've already been committed to, which is reduce property takes. For 5 years, we've been waiting to hear what's going to happen with these blocks of East Charleston. At some point, we need to be able to move on. The committee is working very, very hard, but there's very real financial, social, and emotional components to the decisions the community is making. To make something so invasive this deeply from Alma all the way to Mumford, not only is it unnecessary as a 2-lane road, even as a single-lane road, depending on where you put the roundabout, you're really causing a division within the community. And we've been held at bay for such a long time. At some point, common sense and fiscal sense need to prevail. Do we really need to be doing this? This is our 4th option. It's just come online. I understand that it's preliminary, but it's far too aggressive for our small community, and it's far too decisive. And we do not want to be made into a freeway. We don't want to be the next Embarcadero. That's not the goal here. So I think we need to really look at what this does from Alma to all the way down to Carlson. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our final speaker under oral communications is Jason Metloff. Please
So,
unmute.
Jason, I have a question for you, because you've already spoken on this item. Is there somebody else in your household that wanted to speak? Because otherwise I've got to ask you to put your hand down and we'll go to somebody else.
Jason, you can unmute yourself and talk now.
This isn't Jason, this is Monica. I think I'm the next one on the list.
Okay, perfect. It has Jason's name, so, okay.
Oh, that's weird. Okay. No, this is Monica Tan Brown on the 100 block of Churchill.
Great.
Thank you so much again for all the work that you guys have done. I've definitely spoken before about Churchill. Again, I'm here to speak to you as the ex-cap leaders to please make a proposal for continuing to close Churchill. It is the most viable option right now. It's the one that costs the least. Right now with COVID-19, we really don't know what work is going to look like and what commuting is going to look like coming out of this. And I think it's a very scary option to put so much money into something like the Mike Price option, where we dig a ditch and we do all of this stuff and then, the trains don't come, right? So pick an option that is something that we can, not something that we have to do a huge change and then go back from, right? So that's my first statement. The other is that it is about safety first. It really does. I mean, I totally agree with Terry in the fact that there are a lot of near misses and hits on Churchill. We see it all the time. Being where we are on this block, I don't even park in front of my house because I just think it's too dangerous to try to leave in the mornings when I'm trying to get my kids to school and stuff. So we park halfway up the block so that we don't have to deal with, the kids coming down the bike path. So we really promote that, the bike path should be on Churchill where it would be a direct access to Palo Alto High School. Thank you so much. And thank you for all your work again.
Thank you. We do have one more hand raised. This would be our final speaker, Susan Newman. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and thanks for your work as always. I don't want to distract from the focus on Charleston and Meadow, but I do feel a need to respond to some of the comments about Churchill that have been made and have sort of an overall suggestion for the ex-cap coming out of that. As I think everyone knows, I, along with many of my Southgate neighbors and others in North Palo Alto, are very concerned about the closure of Churchill. We oppose it. But I do want to acknowledge the concerns about bicycle and pedestrian safety. I think it's very important that we pay attention to that. I share those concerns. But I want to be sure to raise the point that both proposals for other proposals for grade separation at Churchill, the viaduct and the partial underpass, have the potential to greatly improve bicycle and pedestrian safety. I think we're aware of the tunnel that's part of the option as currently constructed for the partial underpass. The gains in safety from the viaduct design have rarely been articulated, but in the absence of interruptions by train traffic, Palo Alto would be able to ensure safe crossing for the morning and afternoon Pali bike and pedestrian traffic peaks by including a bike ped only light cycle during peak hours at Churchill and Alma. And in the absence of interruptions by trains, a peak hour traffic light could be installed at Castellea, right across from the Pali driveway and Churchill. There needs to be one now because kids just have to sort of push their way through, and people are, as far as I've seen, are being pretty careful to respect the safety of the bicyclists. But
thank you, Susan. You're out of time.
Sorry, I didn't know it would go on that long. Okay, I'll finish up later. Thanks.
Thank you. That concludes our public speakers.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you, everybody. We didn't really stick to the rule of items just not on the agenda, but I did want to point out that we had over 50 attendees, and so I appreciate you guys taking the time. Also wanted to acknowledge that we have had several XCAP members join us since we took roll. So we've got Tony Carrasco, I see Adina, I see Keith Reckdahl, and I see In Young. So I wanted to make sure I acknowledge them. I think we'd gotten everybody else, but wanted to make sure that was on the record. And okay, we've got a packed agenda and we're already over time since I'd budgeted 15 minutes for oral communications, and it's now, we've gone 37 minutes. So buckle up. And Gary, I'll turn it over to you to do item number 3, which is the Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston grade separation traffic analysis.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see what happens. Okay, can you see it?
It's a little small, but it's good.
Is it too small?
If make it a little bigger would be better.
Okay.
Bottom right corner, I think.
Down here?
Little more to the right.
A little more. Drag that little box to the right.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. How about that?
Perfect.
Much better. Much better.
Barry, do you want to project that thing so that you're not in presentation mode? If you go to the next to that percentage thing, there's a box to the left that looks like that one. If you click that, then we get just the full page slide, I believe.
There you go.
Okay. So we've done traffic analysis now of the original, I guess, alternatives and now the new alternatives. And so these two tables show some intersection level of service calculations for the street, for the intersection of Alma and Churchill. The top table is using existing traffic volumes, well, as they were existing when we started, which they're not now, but as they used to be. And then the second table is using the 2030 forecast from the general plan EIR. So, and then across, I don't know if you can see the cursor, but across the top, we have no improvements. And then we have the closure of Churchill, we have the viaduct, and we have what we're calling the partial underpass, which is the new alternative. And you can see that the existing levels of service are poor in the morning and the afternoon, but they would all be level of service D or better with any of these alternatives given existing volumes. However, if you look down for the 2030 general plan volumes, without any improvements, And this, by the way, doesn't include any increased trains because we can hardly get that to work at all. The delays are so long. But the viaduct would result in a level of service E for the PM, which is not within the city standard, but the partial underpass, I don't know if you can see the whole thing here.
We can.
Okay. The partial underpass would have acceptable levels of service. So that's.
Gary, could you just remind us how many trains were used in your model?
We're using the existing number of trains, which I believe is 9 during the peak hour. 5 in one direction, 4 in the other.
Okay.
Gary, just to be clear, the first line of each table, that's the north-south traffic on Alma Street?
This is the intersection, the whole intersection. So it includes the traffic on Alma and the traffic on Churchill together.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
So that's the analysis for the Alma Churchill alternatives. Now we'll look at the alternatives for Meadow Charleston. There's more, I guess, intersections to look at. So there's only one table per page. So this page is all the alternatives under using existing traffic volumes. And you can see going across the top again, we have the levels of service without any improvements. Then with the viaduct, and then we're calling the new alternative partial underpass also, even though it really is a complete underpass, but it doesn't have all the connections. The first part of the table is for Meadow and Alma, and the second part of the table is for Charleston and Alma. You can see that these intersections operate very poorly under existing conditions. With the viaduct under existing conditions, you would have a kind of a poor level of service in the morning at Charleston, even with the viaduct. I can't, there. But with the partial underpass, then there are now 3 intersections to look at with the partial underpass alternative. There's well, we're calling them 3 intersections, even though there'd probably be only one signal on Alma at Charleston that would kind of control both ramps. But for our analysis, we split it into 2 ramps. And so those would operate fine, and so would the roundabout. We did hear some comments, I can say now, asking, geez, can we really get a 1-lane roundabout in there? We tried a 1-lane roundabout, and we couldn't get it to function at all. It was just complete gridlock. So we couldn't get the system to work with a 1-lane roundabout.
Gary, can you confirm that a viaduct, you did the analysis for viaduct, but is it fair to say that the hybrid would be the same and the trench would be the same?
Yes.
Okay.
And now here are the same results using the 2030 general plan forecast volumes. And you can see it's kind of the same story, only with the level of service being a little worse to start with. And here at Charleston, we weren't able to quite get level service D operation even with the partial underpass because of the forecasted increase in traffic on Alma. But as you can see, if you compare the partial underpass to the other alternatives, it generally works the best. And that's simply because there aren't as many turning movements. Some of the turning movements have been moved to the roundabout. So
can you help us understand that part? Because on this chart, the partial underpass seems to be miraculously more free of traffic than the other options, but either the same number of cars are going somewhere and we have to add these numbers up somehow, or some of the cars simply aren't turning at all and they're going somewhere else in town, right?
Well,
what accounts for this? It's kind of hard to understand what this all means, is I guess what I'm asking.
Right, and I can appreciate that. And the reason that the level of service looks a little better is you're taking some left turns. Let's talk about the left turn from northbound Alma to westbound Charleston. That by far is the heaviest movement at that intersection. It's very, very busy. And that takes a lot of green time for the arrow, right, at the signal under existing conditions. With the partial underpass, those cars don't turn left, they turn right. They don't really even need to get controlled by the signal. So they turn right, kind of on a free turn. They go down, go through the roundabout, come back, and then they don't go through the signal at all. They're in the underpass. So once they turn right, they have no delay. I mean, they do have the time it takes to go up to the roundabout, through the roundabout, and then back the other way. So that extra time is not really figured into this, but this is just kind of the operations of the movements that would be signalized on Alma with this underpass alternative.
So someone going north on Alma to go west on Charleston and has no traffic light and doesn't stop at all.
Well, they would have to yield on the right turn.
Yield
if there's any cars on the ramp, but most of the time, no, they would just not have to stop. They would just yield at that point and then not stop.
Yeah, Gary?
But that would, I assume, sorry, significantly increase the amount of traffic on Charleston in that segment then, right?
Yes. Yes, it significantly increases the traffic on Charleston. And that's why you need the 2-lane roundabout also. There's a question about that, but you're putting all those cars through the roundabout. So there's a lot more traffic on Charleston in that block between Alma and the roundabout.
Gary?
I'm going to ask ex-cappers to raise their hand virtually. Well, yeah, if you could use your digital one as well, it's a little easier for me to see who's waiting. And that way it can queue up in order because I can't see all your faces because there's too many of us. So if you could, you should have on the lower left, in the lower part of the screen, you have a participants thing. And if you click that, then you can, you'll get a little panelists list and then you can it says raise hand in there. That would be great. But for now, I saw Phil and then Tony and then Megan. So go ahead,
Okay,
Phil.
so I just want to clarify. One of the issues on the Meadow crossing is a restricted number of turning movements compared to what we have now.
Yes.
Did you model how much of that traffic spills over onto Charleston?
Yes, we did.
Okay, good. Okay.
Why don't we, should we let him finish, unless there's something that's an immediate clarifying question, we can let Gary go through the rest of the presentation. Is that okay?
That was really all I was going to present just to spark the conversation. I do have some slides about where we think the traffic would go that wouldn't be able to make the movements anymore, but I mean, that's in our written report. If you have any questions, we can go over those, but.
Okay, I'll let, so Tony next and then Megan.
So Gary, I'd have the same question as Greg does for Churchill. Why is that new partial underpass performing so much better? Is it the same thing that you're moving traffic to other locations?
Yes, you're simplifying the operation of the signal because not all movements are going to take place there. And you also don't have, we're assuming that the pedestrian crossing would be an underpass for pedestrians and bikes. So you wouldn't need to provide any signal time for pedestrian or bike movements. So you're reducing the number of movements, which is reducing the number of phases at the signal and the time that you need for the pedestrian phase.
Okay, Megan.
Thanks so much, Gary. I had a couple questions. On figure 4B, but I can just describe it too. In your report, there's 50 cars that were using Churchill to go westbound across Alma that now with the partial underpass can't make that movement.
Actually,
and so,
do you mean this one?
Yes.
Yeah.
So they'll now, it looks like you're having them use Embarcadero. So is the assumption that they would probably use the use Emerson then to make that left-hand turn?
Yes, if we didn't, earlier we talked about doing changes up at that Embarcadero interchange, but absent those changes, yeah, that's what they would need to do. they're shown schematically making a left turn, but you know you can't do that. So
Yeah.
And actually, you can't turn at Emerson either because there's actually a cement block at Emerson and Embarcadero. So you'd have to go down to Waverly because Bryant, you can only turn in the other direction.
You could do that, or you could just go, you know, use Lincoln to Emerson and go around that way, do a loop.
Yeah, the loop, Nadia.
Sorry, I got it.
Cool. My other question was about the previous slide that you were showing the level of service F for the South Charleston light. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about why that specific intersection out of all of those has such a poor level of service.
Oh, well, that's because of the conflict between traffic that wants to turn left going southbound on Alma across the traffic that wants to go northbound on Alma. So that would be, so there's kind of more, there's more traffic that the combination of that left turning through is higher than the conflicting traffic at the north ramp. So that's why it shows up poor at the south ramp. But really, this is kind of broken apart just for illustrative purposes. Really, that would all function as one single system.
Gary, is that figure 10B? So maybe you could discuss it, look at the figure. Is that the best one?
Wait, figure. Oops, I don't have those figures. Those are the figures that show the designs, right?
No, they have the prohibited and then enabled turns.
Oh yeah, yeah. I didn't put that in this PowerPoint presentation, but
okay.
I could call up the actual report. Do we want to put that on the screen, or just?
Yeah, well, if just because I want to make sure everyone understands what that Alma Street Charleston North is and Alma Street Charleston South is, because that took me at least.
Or do we just want talk through it?
Unless you have a picture and we can just talk through it, that's fine.
Well, I think I'm still sharing my screen, so I could get the report, I think.
Yeah, my printed copy doesn't have a page number, so I just see that it's figure 10B, I think.
Sorry. Flip through here. Oops. So here's figure 10B, right? Is that showing?
It's not showing.
It's not?
No.
Oh, shoot.
I think share screen allows you to pick the window, so you may have to click it again and go back and pick the document that you open.
The right window to share.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
Nadia, I have a question.
I'm not a Zoom expert, but I'm becoming one.
So just using this diagram, if you could talk through what is southbound Alma, northbound Alma, that movement that is delayed or that has a conflict.
Well, this shows the concept. There would be two ramps here. Well, it sort of does, but so in order to make a left turn from Alma onto Charleston, you would actually make a left turn at a signal right here and go on to this ramp that would lead you to the roundabout. And that movement, that left turn movement opposes this northbound traffic on Alma. So right, this traffic would need to get a green arrow, and when it got a green arrow, the traffic on Alma would be stopped northbound. So those are both, especially the northbound traffic on Alma in the 2030 general plan condition. It's an extremely busy street. So anytime you give it a red light, you tend to get a poor level of service.
I had one more question, Gary, before I give it over to to Tony, which was any other locations for the roundabout considered other than that location that's shown here?
Well, this is kind of, this one is a little bit schematic. The roundabout is actually right here. So it's
Right.
not.
Was it considered at Carlson, or any other location?
It was, we earlier had talked about putting it here, but that's not close enough at right place. It's not close enough to be able to get the ramp to join in to Charleston, the underpass. So really right now the design shows the roundabout right here, which is the closest it can be. It would be possible to move it farther. You could move it to Mumford, or you could move it down to Carlson. From a traffic standpoint, I don't know about the right-of-way challenges of doing that. I think the reason that is shown right here is that there's a little bit of extra space available.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, Nadia.
Go ahead, Tony, and then I got Larry.
I have a question about the number of trains that you've used in the model, Gary.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that we probably need the full amount of 14 trains to explain to the public what the impacts are going to be between the time that we build the mitigations and the period that the trains increase in size, in frequency. So I'm thinking that those 14 trains would be useful for us to explain to the public where the congestion is going to occur.
Yeah, that's a good comment, and we could do that. I'm not sure we can get it to run with 14 trains. This is a simulation, so it's trying to replicate actual traffic conditions. But at some point you get kind of a gridlock situation, and the traffic can't move at all, which would be, I guess, interesting information for the public to know.
Yes, I think they would need to know, and we also probably need some kind of mitigation during that period as to where traffic will go and how it will be shepherded through the city.
Well, we can, let me make a note to take away to look at that condition.
Yeah, it's actually, well, pre-COVID, it was 10 trains an hour, 5 in each direction, I believe, at rush hour. Adina, if you can chime in if I've got this wrong. And I forget what we had agreed to use as the future conditions, but I hear you, Gary, that the model can't really do that because just to do existing conditions in the future, the train preemption gets so bad that the model breaks, basically. It can't replicate the gridlock that happens.
Well, it can replicate the gridlock. It's just really ugly, but that's important information, as Tony said. So I think that's a good comment that we can explore a little bit.
Okay, I see Larry and then Greg. Larry, you just got to unmute yourself.
Gary, could you put table number 4 back on the screen?
Yes. Okay.
I'm concerned about the qualitative aspect of some of these delays that you have on that table. Let's start with the Charleston, the Alma and Charleston delay of 330 seconds or 5.5 minutes. And the delay at Alma and Meadow of 215 seconds and under the partial underpass of 150 seconds at Alma and Charleston. At what point do people just, do we have any delays like that anywhere in the country? Like, 5.5 minutes seems just extraordinary.
Well, that's a good question. There are places that have delays that are that long. My personal sort of rule of thumb is if delays are 10 minutes or more, then cars won't, or motorist drivers will not tolerate that, and they'll just go somewhere else, or they won't make the trip, or they'll drive it some other time.
Did you say 10 minutes?
Yeah, 10 minents.
Wow.
I mean, it's a range, right? Some people might have less tolerance and say if they have to wait 5 minutes, they're gonna go somewhere else or not drive or whatever. But anyway, I use 10 minutes as a rule of thumb.
Okay, well, that was my next question. So, the numbers there, in your judgment, don't blow up any of these models as being just absolutely untenable.
No, they don't.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Okay, Gregory Braille followed by Keith.
I'll briefly mention that for a time I lived in Palo Alto and worked in Palo Alto, and I told people my office took 15 minutes to get to by bike and 20 minutes to get to by car. Anyway, so I wanted to reiterate what Tony was saying. It's certainly very concerning, and members of the public were saying they don't believe that Caltrain traffic will increase. Well, even if there are no more trains, this chart is showing you what traffic is going to look like and Meadow and Charleston and by the train tracks, even if there are no more trains than there are today. And I think it's very important information to understand that if there were more trains from Caltrain, and I believe that day will come someday, maybe not as soon as we once believed, that if it actually breaks the traffic forecasting model, I think that's very important information to have. And thanks.
Thanks, Greg. Followed by Keith.
Hi, I'm looking at page 22 of the document that shows the 2-lane roundabout. And it is just huge on page 22. The inner diameter of that roundabout is bigger than the current sidewalk to sidewalk road. What speed is that rated for?
Is this the page you're talking about?
Yeah, if you look at that roundabout there, I zoomed in so I could really look at it. But that inner diameter is bigger than the sidewalk to sidewalk road right now. What speed are we designing this for?
Well, that might be a question for Peter, but I believe the roundabout's designed for 25 miles an hour, and the outside diameter should be 160 feet, but I'm not sure. I don't know about the inside diameter.
Plus bike lanes, right?
And roundabouts need to be designed for trucks, so that's part of the issue, why they kind of get big.
But at what speed? I mean, what would happen if you took this inner diameter and shrunk it? Still, trucks go around it; they just have to go more slowly.
I'm not that experienced of a roundabout designer to be able to answer the question about how small you could actually make it and have it function still as a 2-lane roundabout. The standard out of the manuals, 2-lane roundabout has 160-foot diameter, which is what this is, as far as I know.
But 25 miles an hour in a roundabout seems very fast.
Well,
that's sort of max speed on our roads. So you're assuming that everyone going through the roundabout is going to go the same speed that they travel on the road?
These seem like great questions for our next presenter.
Design speed is different than how fast the cars will go. Design speed is always, a little bit higher to give a margin for mistakes. But yeah, these questions are good for the design team.
Gotcha.
And so what options would we have from a traffic standpoint? You said that if you went down to 1 lane, it didn't function. And so that was, what part of the roundabout did not function when you tried to go down to 1 lane?
The entry point going eastbound, where you have the ramp traffic joining with the underpass through traffic on Charleston. And they
Well, that's already merged down to one lane at that point, right?
Well, no, there's 2 lanes going into the roundabout, as you
Okay.
see if you look closely. We're not able to merge them into 1 lane. So there's not enough space to merge them into 1 lane.
Right now, if you look at the existing roadway, you have 2 lanes that go into 1 lane in like 15 feet.
Well,
It
it's
seems pretty
important.
generous. We're being more generous than the current road, which seems to be working.
Well, it's important to realize there's twice as much traffic on the road in this scenario than there is today, because all of the traffic, all the turning traffic has to be on the road too, which right now it's not. So if you wanted a 1 lane roundabout, if this roundabout were pushed farther to the east, so that there was plenty of room for all the movements to merge in together to a single lane before they got to the roundabout, then that might actually work. But you're also, there's a trade-off that the farther you move it, the less motorists might be inclined to use it, and they might seek other routes because they don't want to go a mile out of their way to make a left turn, you know, a half mile down and then a half mile back.
So if we did shrink this down to 1 lane roundabout, it would still have the same inner diameter?
Yeah, it would just take away the outside lane.
So it really wouldn't change the size dramatically. The net size would be roughly the same, just a little thinner.
Well, knocks pretty significant amount, but whether you would have to still acquire right away, you would.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is Peter. Let me just chime in. I was actually starting to talk earlier and I was on mute. I didn't realize it. Yeah, Keith, the diameter of the roundabouts are generally dictated by the design vehicle turning movement. Just make sure that a large vehicle can make the movement. It's not really based on design speed. And I think what Gary just said is true as well, that if it was a single lane roundabout, you're essentially getting rid of just the outside lane. And then I wanted to chime in real quick about the merge rate. You're mentioning, Keith, that some of the existing roads are merging much sooner. But at a planning level phase, we're trying to adhere to general design standards that are acceptable. So a merge rate here, we'd use like a 25-to-1 or 20-to-1. We wouldn't try to go less than that because it just creates kind of an unsafe situation if the merge rate is too abrupt.
So Peter, is it fair to say,
planning level? Go ahead.
Peter, would you say then it's fair to say that this is at this level of planning, this is the ugliest thing we could get? In other words, it can't get any worse than this. And I know people already hate this, but I just want to make that clear. In other words, if we could refine from here, but we're not likely to slide backwards, at least in terms of just generally, or is there a possibility that that would be worse?
I think that's a fair statement. That this is, the largest, and I don't want to say it's not. I don't want to say it's too concerning. I mean, it's how I would lay it out if I were designing it. You might get another design engineer that would take liberties with the merge rate, but at a planning level stage, I don't recommend doing that.
I'm sorry, could I just interject real quick? This is Ed. Peter, could you repeat what's the outside diameter of this roundabout?
Yeah, I don't have that handy with me. I want to say it's on the order of 160 feet.
Okay.
Or maybe 170-ish.
That is notable because it is at most the same size, if not actually smaller than the roundabouts on the Stanford campus. And in particular, I'm looking at Sarah and Campus Drive, as well as the Escondido and Bodwin. Those are all just about the same size.
Ed, does it compare with the Galvez one?
It does as well. Galvez is a little different because it's at a weird angle, so it's not a circle, it's a little oblong. Okay. But in general, yes.
A question about the bike and ped paths around it. Does 160 feet include those, or is that in addition?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I was just about to clarify that. The 160 that I quoted was for the roadway width. It doesn't include the sidewalks on the outside. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yes. Ex-cappers, I think people who've spoken have already, still have their hand raised. So if you have raised your hand and you spoke, could you put it down for me so I can keep track of who's next? I think last person I remember is Keith. So Megan and then Adina.
Thanks, Nadia. Since we have Peter, I had two other questions about the Churchill traffic plan. One was about the email that we received about the blind corners. Is there any, has it been considered, or is there any way that we could remove those blind corners in the underpass, either the one with the closure where it goes down next to the train tracks, or the one at Kellogg?
Oh, you're talking about for the ped bike path?
Want me to show
Yeah.
you?
Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, for the ped bike path at Churchill. Thank you.
I can put it on the screen, I think.
Yeah, there it is. I think
Yep.
you just passed it.
Is this it or no?
Next
No.
one.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. So you're talking about like that 90-degree bend right next to the football field?
Yes.
I didn't see an email about that, so that question caught me a little bit off guard. I don't really, unless you're taking more property, more space to get rid of that blind corner, you could probably improve it, but it's going to require more space. This layout was intended to try to keep that Embarcadero bike path as is, as much as possible.
Okay. That sort of goes to my second question, which might just be for staff, which is, given the discussion of and Caltrain's letter that we received, is there any thinking about whether this Kellogg or the Churchill closure bike pedestrian tunnels are also impermissible to Caltrain as a use of their land?
So Megan, I think we need to hold this because this is technically, we're talking under the hexagon item. And yeah, I get where you're going, but we need to stay on this topic. But let's try to hold that for maybe when we're doing the member updates, and you can hold, because I know it's your last meeting and I want you to be able to kind of throw that in there. Would you mind holding that?
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, I see Larry and then Adina and then Dave. Larry, I think you're muted. If you wanted to speak, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, I've spoken, Nadia. You should have taken me off.
Oh, actually, Larry, you have to put your hand down. I can't do it because I'm not a moderator.
Okay.
I don't know if someone could
All right,
put his hand down. Adina, your turn.
Yeah, so just quickly, because of the that circle is in part because of trucks. So a very basic question is that route required to be usable by trucks? Yeah, how important is that, or legally required is that as a truck route?
If I can, I just want to respond. Just keep in mind that we're not just designing it for trucks. This would be for buses, school buses, garbage truck, other large vehicles. Not that would actually need to use this for sure. It's not indicating that this is necessarily a truck route or otherwise. That said, I think this actually would be a truck route.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that real quick is that all these intersections and turning movements are laid out based off of a design vehicle called a WB40, which is a 40-foot length of axle for a bus, which mimics a lot of fire trucks. So we're trying to accommodate a large emergency vehicle, more or less. So we're not here trying to capture turning movements for 70, something that's on a Caltrans freeway off ramp, a very large truck. So we're just trying to capture the cities, at least the emergency vehicles. So at the very least.
Thank you.
Okay, Adina, then we're moving on to Dave Shen. And just as a reminder, we're really supposed to be directing our questions towards Gary Black, because this is really the hexagon portion. We'll have a chance to hit up Peter DiStefano in the next segment. So I just want to make that clear.
Okay, just quickly for Gary, the numbers for the partial underpass, you modeled that still based on the design that we've been talking about, which had some concerns about taking Caltrain right of way, even if just a little bit. You guys didn't figure out something to get around that, right? It's still modeled after that particular design. I just wanted to make sure of that.
Are you talking about at Churchill?
Yeah, sorry, back at Churchill at the partial underpass design.
Yeah, the is on the screen now.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we modeled. Yeah.
So still the previous design, you guys didn't figure out a way of.
We didn't figure out a way to avoid the right of way.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Do we have any other ex-cappers who might want to ask Gary Black some questions? Carrie or In-Young, anything? Okay, before we go to the public, then I have a list of my own questions. So Gary, because we've had a lot of attendees, and I'm going to make you sort of repeat some things that you've said before, but I just want to put those out there for folks who might be joining us for the first time. Why does the traffic study go until 2030, but the Caltrain business plan goes to 2040? Can you explain kind of what the rules of engagement are for the work that you do?
Well, the 2030, or what we call the future forecasts, are based on the Palo Alto general plan. And that was forecast at 2030. And so that's kind of like, I would call it the Palo Alto planning horizon right now. And though, you know, with this new COVID world, those forecasts might get pushed out 10 years or something, for all I know.
Great, okay.
They're probably conservative at this point.
And I saw in the report that you wrote that a level of service of D or better for signalized and unsignalized intersections is considered acceptable for the city of Palo Alto. Can you explain? I know there's been some changes in the law about the difference between level of service and VMT miles. Is there anything in these designs that would be impacted by looking at that through the VMT lens instead of the LOS lens? Or is the change not super significant?
Looking at these kinds of issues, VMT doesn't really come into play. And that is a standard from the general plan. So it's not so much a CEQA issue as it is the local or the Palo Alto policy.
Okay, great. And then in the Churchill scenario, so looking at alternative, what's the table number? Oh, table 1, I guess. You, for the viaducts, both for Churchill and for South Palo Alto, you kept the same number of stacking lanes and turning stacking lanes that we have today, correct? So when we've discussed the fact that if you put a viaduct and you still had the stacking lanes, you actually would increase throughput more than we might intend to. This actually shows, this is like kind of ramped up throughput, and it seems like the partial underpasses still do better. Is that accurate?
I'm not sure what you're asking. The volume, the traffic volume is assumed the same for all these scenarios. So there's no assumption of, oh, well, now you can fit more cars on there. It's apples to apples for traffic volume.
Okay, even though the stacking lanes actually would allow for more, because now there's no train preemption. So you have the ability to stack more cars, which theoretically means you'd be able to push through more cars, right?
Well, you could push through more cars on the left turn, but you would be stopping cars, say southbound on Alma, that can go now when the train comes. So you're helping one movement and you're hurting another movement. And that is reflected in these calculations.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I didn't see any raw data. So for South Palo Alto, I noticed that the table numbers do have the truck movements for those who are interested. They showed both the light trucks and the heavier trucks, I think, but we don't have those for Churchill. And I don't remember if that was in the raw data of the TJKM studies. Do you recall offhand?
I don't recall. if there were truck counts. No, sorry.
Okay, so Philip, that would be something good to note because that I believe there's a no trucks thing on that portion of Churchill, on the portion of Churchill that's on the west side of the tracks. And I'm just thinking about PAUSD and how that might, play into how many trucks are coming and going, and what that means. So we might want to look at that. Let's see. I had asked about the significant asymmetry, but you explained that. So you explained that what drives the placement of the Charleston roundabout is really how quickly everybody is merging together. And so that if you move that further back, you might have a possibility to reduce it to one lane. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else that drives the placement and the size of that roundabout that we should think about when we're looking at these?
Well, from a traffic standpoint, we want to be able to get the two lanes to come together, the ramp and the underpass on Charleston.
Okay.
We need the roundabout to be after those two lanes come together. In terms of how far after, the farther after, then the more likely you can get away with just a single lane roundabout. Again, the trade-off being, if you move it a half mile away, are people going to be willing to travel an extra mile to make a left turn?
Mm-hmm.
So we want it, to try to minimize the pressure for seeking alternate routes. I think we want to keep it as close to Alma as we can.
Yeah, I think so. An important thing that has been explained to me, because I have not typically been involved in the Charleston Rostradale project, is that basically the improvements that are on there have been designed for the level of traffic that we want, not necessarily the level of traffic that we would have if we let it kind of go freely. And so I think a lot of the concerns that you're hearing expressed from the folks in the community is that they've worked really hard to get it to the throughput that they have now, and seeing a large 2-lane roundabout is potentially reversing the stuff that they worked really hard to get to. So I think, that's why we're trying to understand those. So I just wanted to put that out there in case you were not aware. It's a big deal, the Charleston Rostradale project here, and it's an important one.
I am aware, and I know we've heard some comments along the way of we want to downgrade Alma, and we didn't address that. These are either existing counts, the way Alma actually functions today, or future forecasts with Alma exactly functioning the way it is today. So
Mm-hmm.
there's no downsizing, if you will.
And you didn't look at any, so one of the problems that exists today is that it's very difficult to tweak the timing of the lights because of train preemption, both at Meadow and Charleston, and because Meadow and Charleston are less than a mile apart. So it was explained to me by traffic folks that when you have two train preemption events so close to each other and interrupted at such an irregular schedule, Caltrain doesn't run like Japan, which runs within seconds. Like really, it's very irregular, that they can't optimize the lights as well as they might in other conditions. Theoretically, whether you're doing the partial underpass or the viaduct, you now have the opportunity to really optimize the Alma lights in a way that we don't have them today. And that isn't necessarily reflected in your traffic study, correct? You're just doing it how it is today and how it would be in the future, but not with any improvements.
No, that statement is incorrect. The signals have been optimized for these, like for the viaduct option.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing that without the Caltrain preemption, then you can play around with the signal timing to get it to work more efficiently.
Okay, and that includes along Alma itself between Meadow and Charleston, meaning that whole length
Yes.
of road?
Yeah,
Okay.
that whole piece of road.
Oh,
yeah.
good. Okay. All right, great. And I think that's all I have. I see Keith has one more question, Keith, and then I'll go to public comment.
Yeah, clarification on tables 1 and 2. The Churchill closure includes the Embarcadero and El Camino improvements. Is that correct?
Well, this is just showing the level of service at Alma and Churchill itself. It's not, it's not discussing, what happens anywhere else. There would not be, I mean, maybe where you're going is there would not be a queue, a backup queue that would go all the way from Embarcadero to to Churchill and cause this intersection to lock up, if that's what you're thinking.
Okay, so the grades here are unchanged, whether or not we have any improvements at Embarcadero and Alma.
Not at this particular location, because this is just looking at Churchill.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I know we're very behind schedule, so I'm gonna take it to public comment. I am going to ask the members of the audience that already spoke on this issue during oral communications, if you would please instead turn in your comments written so that we can really kind of speed up the meeting, because I know folks really also want to get to the Meadow Charleston piece. I would really appreciate that. We will also, I want to remind people that we're going to be going over the schedule later, and you will see that there are going to be some virtual town halls. So there's going to be more opportunities to interface on this. I don't want everyone to think that this is the one and only chance you've got. So after that plea, I will turn it over to Ruchika, and each speaker will have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Our first speaker on this agenda item is Patrice Bernal. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hi, I'd just like some clarification on the scope of the work from Alma to Charleston. In the paperwork we received, in 8A, it's in one location. And then it's closer to Alma than it is to actually the Charleston-Mumford crossing. So I just wanted to get some clarification on that. And then also, I'm a little uncomfortable when I hear that the placement can go anywhere on Charleston. The further we go away from Alma into Charleston impacts all of the neighborhoods, all of the community activities, and all of the people who live there. So if we're going to be forced to have this option, and it needs to be 2 lanes for what I've heard, keeping it as close to Alma as we could would minimize some of the impact on the neighborhood and potentially mean less property takes, which is something everyone on Charleston has been living with for innumerable years. So I'm asking the committee to please look at this from the perspective of not in your backyard, but actually your backyard, because it is mine. And we would like to not see the neighborhood that we've committed to and been part of a community of for so many years become a freeway or a thoroughfare. We'd like to see it, if it must be 2 lanes, keeping the swell of that roundabout as close as possible to Alma and Wright, just so it doesn't take as many properties and it doesn't impact the neighborhoods. Keeping in mind, at Carlson begins Stevenson House, Hoover, JLS, Mitchell Park, Cubberley. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Drew. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hello there. So thank you for the presentation. I have a couple things for the report labeling that I think would be helpful as a member of the public looking at it. When I looked at like drawing or figure 4A and I look at the red arrows, I was like, why is there 30 right turns on the Kellogg? But then understanding the presentation, you're talking about schematic versus actual. And I think how these are labeled and some stuff would be very helpful in these drawings, because just a quick look implies that there's traffic turning there, but that's actually not the case because it's schematic. And then on the original slides that had the level of service, I think having some notes on those pages that talk about there's less turn movements on the partials, and then more travel time, and then traffic might be shifting, and then the number of trains, just having those assumptions on those same pages. So if the page gets taken away from the report, it has that information on it. And so there's like, it can be kept in context. So those are some feedback on the report. And then I had a question. It probably hasn't been done, but I'm wondering, when I looked at this, I kind of got the impression after a while that this is almost like a split diamond. I think, Gary, you'll understand that. With Charleston and Meadow, if you consider those 2 together. And I'm just wondering, instead of the roundabout, having a ramp down for Alma northbound onto then left turn onto Charleston and Arastadero. And if that movement could be done, you avoid the roundabout, all the property takes there. I realize there'll be some property takes on the down ramp there, but how does that flow for the traffic and stuff? Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is J.M. Mommsen. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hello, my name is Jean-Marc Mommsen. I live in Carlson Circle. Thank you for allowing a little bit of time. I have 2 young kids, 9 and 11, and I'm hoping we can keep the 2 lanes as close as possible to Alma on the eastern side. I moved that roundabout or any other options to get away as much as possible from Hoover School or access to Mitchell Park and Carlson Circle as a crossing there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Penny Elson. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Thank you. So a couple of things. I found it, I'm used to looking at these plans, and I had a very difficult time working through this set of renderings and drawings. You know, when we have like figure 10B conflicting with the plans, this kind of thing is very confusing to people. You're hearing people complain about things that aren't actually in the plans, largely because figures and plans conflict with each other. And I think it would help a lot to fix that. I think there needs to be some kind of animation or something of what happens with the pedestrian and bicycle grade separation. How this works is not at all clear to me from the drawings. And again, I'm used to looking at these things. I think when I try to figure out like, okay, if I enter here, where do I end up? And where do I go on a bicycle? And how does that work with the motor vehicles? I cannot figure that out from these drawings. And it really matters because this is a school route. Both of these are school routes that carry lots of kids, all 3 of them actually. So I think that should be very clear. I think you've done a pretty good job of doing that for Churchill, but I would say that's not the case for Meadow and Charleston, and it really, really needs work. Also, it'd be helpful to label slides more clearly. I think the previous speaker, Drew, made an excellent point. I kept trying to figure out, okay, what am I looking at here? And I'd look at the slide label and go, okay, that doesn't entirely answer the question that I'm asking. So we need to make sure that we have drawings, renderings that help members of the public who are not used to looking at things like this understand these very complicated concepts. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We do have a few more speakers. So our next speaker is Karen Kalinsky. Please unmute yourself and you can begin to talk now.
Hi, I live on Meadow, and I'm only going to speak to the implications for Meadow because I think I leave the talking about Charleston implications to those neighbors. And I'd like to make 2 points. The first one is regarding weighing the 4 alternatives for Meadow that are currently on the table. If I understand correctly, the Meadow underpass would be less costly and would require a shorter construction period than the 3 other choices: trench, hybrid, and viaduct. I feel hybrid and viaduct options offer no advantages over the underpass. And while the trench would be preferable visually, I think it would be too expensive to build and maintain. So while all the proposals involve difficult trade-offs and compromises, I favor the underpass as the most cost-effective. The second point I'd like to make has to do with crossing on East Meadow for bikes and pedestrians. AECOM noted that the need for safe crossing for pedestrians and bikes should be made at Ramona or Bryant, and offered, for example, a raised crosswalk with flashing beacons or a roundabout. I would say it makes more sense to have a bike crossing at Bryant, since Bryant is designated as a Palo Alto bike route. I feel that roundabouts which have a bike lane merging with a car lane into a single lane are not safe for bikes and not particularly helpful to pedestrians. On the other hand, a raised crosswalk would be good for pedestrians, but not very convenient for wheelchairs, cyclists, or strollers. So I would like to propose a pedestrian bike push button activated crosswalk with flashing signals similar to the ones on San Antonio Road. So in summary, I'm in favor of the proposed underpass at Meadow, and I propose to press to cross bike and pedestrian crosswalk with flashing lights for crossing East Meadow at Bryant. And thank you all for your efforts to include community input. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is with the screen name KWB. Please unmute yourself and begin to speak now.
Very good.
Hi, thank you. I have a couple questions. I think one would be if you would explicitly put in the diagrams where people are going to walk, where bikes are going to go. You know, are bikes going to have to be in the roundabout? Are people going to have to be in the roundabout? And what happens, like on the one figure, I had a question. Let's say I'm on a bike and I'm at Charleston and El Camino, and I'm going to ride east. How do I get over to that, you know, the bike lane, which seems to be on the north side? And another thing I would say is, I think you need to be explicit about what property you're going to have to take in order to do this. And another question I have is, on Alma and Charleston, are you going to take away the tree lawns? You know, right now there's the sidewalk, there's what I call, or some people call a tree lawn, a pretty wide one that separates you from Alma. So when you're walking, you feel very comfortable that, you know, the high-speed traffic on Alma isn't going to get you. And the same thing on Charleston, that there's a tree lawn, there's a sidewalk and then the tree lawn, and then Charleston. So is that going away? And I think you do need to really somehow give a comparison of the traffic that's going to end up on Charleston if you have a roundabout versus if you have a trench. And so I would vote for the trench. So those are my comments.
Thank you. That concludes our public speakers.
Okay, thank you. Ex-cappers, unless you have any specific questions that are for Gary, I want to move us, because we're very tardy today, on to the next agenda item, which is AECOM's presentation about the Meadow Charleston alternatives. And I realize that in some ways this discussion went out of order, but we kind of, when I was going over the agenda with city staff, we felt like it would be important to understand the most heavy turn movements when we were going to have the conversation about the why Charleston and Meadow were designed the way that they were. So Gary, are you going to hang around for this next portion in case there's some more spillover questions, or?
Yes, I can hang around. You bet.
Okay. All right. Okay. So Peter, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, there we go. Off mute. I'm in trouble today. Thanks, Nadia. Let me, can everyone see my screen with the Meadow Drive Underpass PowerPoint slide?
Not yet.
No. Still just seeing you, Peter.
Okay, I'm having a little technical difficulty here. Hold on. Share screen. Okay, sorry. There's one extra button I'm not used to clicking. There we go. Can you see that now?
Yes.
All right, sounds good. Let me get set up here. Okay, so I'm going to first go over the exhibits and renderings for Meadow, and then we'll do Q&A, and then we'll jump to Charleston. Does that sound good?
Yep, sounds good, and we'll try not to interrupt you.
Very good. So for Meadow, I think everyone understands, but let me just give everybody an overview real quick. We're going to keep the rail where it is today, vertically and horizontally, and we're going to dip Meadow to go underneath the railroad with the bridge and underneath Alma. We're going to have a ped bike separated path on the south side of Meadow. That's shown in that magenta hot pink color. And we're also going to have a signalized intersection at the where the southbound off-ramp connects to Meadow in the underpass. We got some renderings here that show that a little bit more clearly. Three-dimensionally, it's a little bit hard to visualize just on the plan view. So with this, with the intersection with Alma and Meadow, we've got 4 legs with 2 potential turning movements for each leg. So a total of 8 potential movements. So in this alternative, we're proposing to allow only 3 of those 8 movements. The first one would be from westbound Meadow, let's say coming from Emerson, and you make the right and you could go on to northbound Alma. And then the 2 other movements would come from southbound Alma. We take that off ramp, if you will, into the intersection, into the underpass, and you can make a right or a left onto Meadow. So that's the southbound Alma to eastbound or westbound Meadow. All other turning movements would be prohibited in this configuration. Let me touch upon quickly some of the vehicle movements that are not allowed on Park Boulevard. There won't be vehicle access directly to Meadow, so there's essentially be a cul-de-sac or dead end there. And we gave a presentation last week to the technical working group. I just want to kind of highlight quickly some of the comments that were made during that meeting. There's a desire to have a sidewalk or a pedestrian connection going on northbound, connecting northbound, southbound along Alma, on the east side of Alma. So we could put some kind of bridge there to make that connection across Meadow. Similarly, on the west side of the tracks, we could provide a ped bike bridge over Meadow that kind of connects both sides of Park Boulevard. Now, this would require some kind of sidewalk or access that parallels that's shown here in the blue color. And that would require property impacts to at least one of those parcels fronting at the corner of Park and Meadow. This isn't really shown on this exhibit, but there would be some kind of access for pedestrians and bikes to get from Park into that depressed underpass. Not depressed underpass, but the depressed ped bike path. So it'd be a stair or some kind of ramp that you could access to the magenta area. And then, as someone from the public just mentioned, we'd have provide a safe crossing, whether it's a raised crosswalk or something like that, either at Ramona or Bryant. And the main concern there is just to get pedestrians and bikes from one side of Meadow to the other, since the dedicated path is on the south side of Meadow. Let me quickly highlight some of the property impacts we'd have on this alternative. There'd be sliver acquisitions fronting Meadow on each side, some along Park Boulevard, right over here on the north side of Park. And there would be full acquisition of the apartment complex. I think someone from the public mentioned, if we narrow up Meadow somehow, we could maybe avoid that take. The problem here is that there's a driveway fronting the north side of Meadow, and there'd be a huge elevation difference because Meadow is starting to dive down there. So it's not so much the horizontal separation that's the problem, it's the vertical elevation difference. And I think that's about it for the Meadow. Let me share the 3D renderings. Okay, I had that up already. I think everyone has seen this in their package, but let me just quickly go over these. This is a view looking southbound on Alma. On the right, there's that off-ramp to southbound Alma, and on the left is that on-ramp to northbound Alma. This is down in the underpass on Meadow, looking towards the west. This would be a signalized, mouse here. This would be a signalized intersection here. Up here on the left, you can hardly see it, but that's the elevated ped bike path. This is a view kind of from the same direction, but from above. You can clearly see the ped bike path here, 20-foot width here on the left. This is a view, aerial view from the other direction. You can see Park Boulevard here in the foreground. Again, vehicular access closed because of the, we're starting to lower the ped bike path over here. So there's an elevation difference between the ped bike path and Park Boulevard. So it'd be a retaining wall there.
Peter, it's probably worth noting that, sorry to interrupt, but it's probably worth noting that some of the pedestrian and bicycle additions that you showed in your other slide are not included in these renderings.
Right, thanks, Phil. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, some of the comments made at last week's meeting, they're not included in these renderings. And then on the north side of Meadow, the connection with Park would have to be lowered about 4 feet at that intersection. Again, another view of the underpass. You can see that that right turn and that on-ramp to northbound Alma. This is a little bit better view of the elevated separated ped bike path on the left. There's a view of Alma looking north. Again, different views of the ramps, the on and off ramp to Meadow. This is a street level view at Park on the left, ped bike path on the right. And this is just an aerial view overall. So I'll open it up now for any questions on this one.
Ex-Cappers, can you put your hands up for me? I see Greg and then Tony and then Megan for right now. So Greg, go ahead.
So it looks like you're proposing a two-way bike ped path on the one side there, which is elevated and separated from traffic, which is cool.
That's right.
Have we given some thought, I'm sure you have, as to how cyclists going the other direction, are we imagining that someone coming from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen would cross over onto the bike path and then cross back out again? How can we do
Not
that
sure what
safely?
you're asking there.
So that's what those additional bike pedestrian improvements are supposed to be.
So the additional signalized raised things there so you can get across.
Right. So if you,
right.
yeah, number 4A of the first packet, page 1 of the first packet, you'll see there's a bike ped bridge that basically goes parallel to the train right there. That would allow people to go to the other side of Park Boulevard, right? Like what we have at Charleston. And then there is a question of further down at the bottom part of your screen, let's say, how do cyclists cross back over? And further up on your screen, how do they cross back over? And so one of the, they mentioned raised crosswalks with flashing beacons. You know, another question that at least some members of the technical working group had was, could there be a small roundabout further, like at Ramona or at Bryant, to be able to allow cyclists to be able to cross over to get to that side and be able to take the underpass?
Yeah, because I'm imagining if I'm proceeding what I guess is southbound on Meadow from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen on my bicycle, I might just stay in the right lane and ride straight on through. And that's legal, but it would be nice to have a safe way for people who don't want to do that to also do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay, thanks. That's the nature of my question. Thank you.
Tony, you're next.
Yes, so my question relates to this shoe fly track. Do these alternatives at Meadow and Charleston require shoe fly tracks in order to construct this geometry?
Yeah, we have a video showing that. So maybe it's a good time for you to chime in on that. There's a whole other topic.
Hey, why don't I suggest we hold that thought, since I think that will take some time to get into, and we'll come back to it.
Okay.
Thanks, Tony.
Megan?
Thanks. My question was just about grocery outlet. Is the light that allows you to access the grocery outlet parking lot, does that still exist? Or do the ramps interfere with it?
Which parking lot are you talking about? Is it, let me go to, I think I can
I think I can answer that. No, it should not. It should be, I think, at grade by then. Yeah, there you can see it there.
Oh,
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, we essentially the ramps come to grade right about where that barrier ends.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And Philip.
Okay. Tony and Megan, you guys can put your hands down, and then I see Phil Burton and then Larry.
Am I next? Nadia?
Yes.
Yes.
Phil.
Okay,
you're up.
so where Park Boulevard is depressed about 4 feet, could you go back to that rendering?
Yeah, this
Okay,
is
good.
this one. Here, let me go to a different one. Oh, that's probably the best one. That's right. It's this intersection right here is lowered about
Yeah,
4 feet.
Okay, so what about the impacts to the properties that where Park Boulevard is being depressed?
Right. There'd probably be a driveway modification for the first driveways. And
Although
if we
I'm sorry to jump in, but I just want to note that,
yeah,
you know, that we do believe that potentially the properties on either side there on Park would be potentially have impacts for the ped bike crossing there as well.
Right.
Yeah, so in other words, if I'm standing in my front lawn and I normally could just walk onto Park Boulevard, but I can't do that without taking a steep drop, what happens?
Yeah, there may be a short retaining wall there. Those details haven't been hashed out, but there likely wouldn't be a property acquisition. And if there would be any acquisitions, it would be very small. But yeah, there would be, I don't know if you've seen those before, where they take the streets, they lower them, but maintain the property next to it. Like maybe like a gas station. That Holly is a good example, where they'd be short retaining walls. Holly and San Carlos.
So some kind of safety feature then, so people don't fall down, so to speak.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Either that, or you could grade and slope the ground next to the lowered sidewalk. So a couple different ways you could do it.
All right.
Depends on how much you're lowering it.
But definitely there's an issue there.
Yeah, that's something that'd have to be engineered.
All right, thank you. I'll lower my hand now.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Larry, you're next. We can.
Yes, I want to go back to the apartment building on Alma, Peter. First question is there any easy fix so that we don't have to take that property? Or maybe even a hard fix?
No, the challenging part is this driveway right here. So we have a significant elevation difference there. I don't know what the exact number is. I think it's on the order of 8 to 12 feet.
Mm.
And I don't think there's any way you could regrade that driveway. It's just too much of an elevation difference there. We just don't have enough distance to kind of grade it out. I think there's some carports here too, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe they're just parking spots, but
They're actually garages.
Garages on the first.
Garages. That's right.
So the access would be lost to all the garages facing Meadow.
As I understand it, though, the city of Caltrain acquires that property. For this, we'd only be using a small part of it. Is that correct?
Well, that's part of it. There's also the loss of the frontage road on the Alma side. That's not, well, we don't know to what extent that the apartment depends on that parking on what's shown as the ramp. That area is currently a frontage road with, I think it's parallel parking along there, and also
I believe it's angled parking, actually.
Is it angled parking? Okay, I couldn't remember.
Peter,
that's not where I'm going. My question is, what percentage, assuming that lot was just totally leveled, so it's just raw ground now, what percentage of that property would be necessary to be used for these road improvements? 5%, 10%?
I don't know the percent offhand, but it'd be very low actually. It'd be a small amount. So this could be it could be developed as something different, like
Right. It's not,
different
it's not the
access
use
or
of the property that's the issue. It's the access to the property that's
right.
impacted.
Right. Thank you, Ed. Yeah, it's not the acquisition of the physical property. It's the access issue.
Well, what I'm getting at is that is there a possibility that once the property was taken and portion used for the road, that some governmental entity could then reuse the property for housing?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So that we wouldn't be losing all of the I can't remember the number of units. We might even end up with more units there than we presently have. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, as long as we can figure out the access.
Yeah, there's also potential to eliminate this wall altogether, like excavate all this ground and put a retaining wall on the other side.
Or you drop,
there's a lot of different
property itself.
So why is
Yeah,
that
there's a lot
lowered
of different
anyway?
possibilities here.
Peter,
Beyond
can you?
the ramp?
Yeah, why can't it stay at grade?
Yeah, what we're trying to do here is minimize the, yeah, maybe this is a good view. Yeah, this is a good angle, good shot. What we're trying to do here is avoid an extra lane here. Because that means probably full acquisition of this house at this corner of Emerson and Meadow. So the plan was just to.
How many feet are you short? Because as someone pointed out, your bike ped path is 20 feet, but the new bridge that we're building is only 12. So by my count, there's 8 feet maybe to play with. And so if you didn't have to, if you had 8 feet, does that give you enough space to be able to keep that lane at the surface and salvage that apartment building?
No, again, the, no, I just don't think that's possible unless you're talking about, that kind of opens up another can of worms on the south side of Meadow, because then you're going to have to shift everything to the south to make that room. And now you're talking more property acquisition on the south side.
But if that's less
you're
than.
Talking about property acquisition over here.
Right, but is that, if the bike path is 20 feet, is that correct?
Yeah.
Could it be 12 without having a shift?
Yeah, that's something we've talked about before. I mean,
it's okay. We can discuss it further at some other point. Just a question, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, again, it was somewhat modeled after Homer. Homer is a 20-foot tunnel, and that's a relatively short tunnel, right? That's only about 60, 70 feet long. I mean, this is going to be several hundred feet long, so we don't want to skimp on the width.
Okay.
At least not on a planning level. We don't want to, we don't want to have you guys come 5 years later and say, hey, we want 15, 20 feet.
Understood. Larry, did you have anything else? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, I have Dave Shen, followed by Adina.
Just a question about traffic rerouting, and I apologize, I might have missed this in your presentation, but is the assumption that all the traffic from Alma turning movements onto Meadow is going to be routed to Charleston and maybe Oregon, or is that too far away? Is that what you guys are thinking right now with this design?
So this is Gary jumping in. Most of it, but not all of it. And in our report, we have figures that show where we think the traffic would be rerouted. But so we think not all of it would go to Charleston.
And the other would go to Oregon, you think?
No, it would pick its way through the neighborhoods. Some would go to El Camino. Maybe you can look at the diagrams, and then if you have any questions.
Okay, I'll look again.
Ask. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Adina. Adina, you're muted.
Okay, I'm now double unmuted. Great. So the two questions are, How many apartments are there in that apartment building?
Sorry,
Do you know that?
yeah, we don't have that information at this time. I will say that I just counted the angled parking spaces in front. There's 10 angled spaces in front of the building. To provide context, I don't know exactly the number of units in this building.
Okay. And then over at the Park and Meadow Solutions for people who are walking and bicycling, I see how people would be able to use the extra features to be able to go across park with a little bit of a detour. Is there some alternative way for people who want to go between who are biking and walking and want to go from park to meadow? Is there any way that somebody can do that, or yeah?
So from the south side of Meadow, you're asking, I think, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. The way it's set up right now, they would have to make that left and head westbound on Meadow and then cross or get onto Meadow from there. I don't know what the next street is west of Park, but if I have to go the next street over.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
And the reason.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the reason for that quickly is there's just an elevation difference between between Meadow and that path.
All right. So I see how that works. Is it somewhere in the packet that I missed where it's drawn how someone walking or biking would be able to eventually complete their route?
No, we don't. We haven't developed any exhibit showing various routes. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that would help because if a movement is being disabled, it's like one thing if it is a driver and that driver can go a quarter mile out of their way in a minute. Somebody walking cannot go a quarter mile out of their way in a minute. So it would be good to have that be illustrated about how a pedestrian would be able to, get to where they're going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the comments with the technical working group last week is kind of what you were describing. It's like how do people, for example, get across Meadow via Park?
Mm-hmm.
And what we're going to propose here is what was shown here in green is we could put a pedestrian bridge here. So they'd have to take a somewhat circuitous route, but it's relatively direct.
Right. So the direct on Park, I see how that works. The thing that I don't see how it works is Park to Meadow, and I don't have the entire grid in my head to know how you would do that. So that would be helpful to have illustrated. Sorry, it is. I had something else at 6. So I'm going to drop off and look at the minutes and the recording. Thank you. Bye.
Okay.
And Keith, you're next, but before you go, it's worth mentioning for the public and for everybody, when the drawings and the schematics that you guys have seen and the renderings that Peter will show don't match because the technical working group was adding all of the things related to bike peds. And to be honest, there was a conversation that was had about whether we should even show any of this. And we erred on, we'd rather have this be an iterative process and show the community where we are with the warts so that everyone can participate in helping us, fix what was not working in this thing. And clearly the bike ped function, this is done at a level of trying to do a proof of concept to make sure that there wasn't any major engineering issues that prevented doing the concept for separating the cars and the trains. And now we're working on the bike ped element, which is clearly just as important. We didn't get there that fast. And so there will be another, hopefully, meeting of the technical working group to kind of go through all this. So for those of you who've sent in emails, and I just want to make sure that you know that we've heard you, there hasn't been any outreach. The fact that you heard about this before it was presented means that the outreach that we're doing is actually working. This is at such an early phase that, this is why it looks the way it does and doesn't seem to solve all the problems. That's what we're here to do. So we really do appreciate you guys hanging in there and giving your feedback. But I just wanted to make it clear that when Peter does go through the renderings, or the video, you will not see the bike ped things everyone's asking about. That will be addressed later. So go ahead, Keith.
Okay. I love the bike ped tunnel, but the connections just seem so unnatural. It just seems like you get dumped out in the middle of nowhere. Is it possible to continue on the east side, make this like a 12-foot bike lane all the way to JLS? Is there room on Meadow to do that?
Yeah, we haven't, that's something we haven't really looked at yet, but those are kind of related to the comments we received at last week's technical working group, is to improve the connectivity for peds and bikes from this proposed alternative to what's there today. I think that's kind of maybe the next step with this alternative, and those improvements.
Okay.
Some of those improvements could be made pretty easily.
Okay, so I'd encourage both the connections at the end of the tunnel, but also lengthen that bike lane. Just don't stop the bike lane, continue it as far as you can, because most of that traffic is going to JLS. And the other thing is the turning movements. The fact that we only have 3 out of 8, that seems like a small number. And for example, especially if we have to acquire that apartment complex, is there then room to add another lane under the underpass to support a left turn lane? And that would be from eastbound Meadow to northbound Alma.
Yeah, we thought about that as well. In fact, I asked Gary about that. I think the geometry for that would create too many issues with additional property impacts on the west side of the tracks, because we got to create that separation and that space for that left turning pocket, and it can't be too short either. We need to provide space for queuing.
Okay. Yeah.
So we didn't think that was possible, but no, that's a good comment. We were thinking about that as well.
Well, especially if we have to acquire the one on Park, just the left here, and the apartment complex along the way, then that may simplify some of it. And that also would allow you.
Right. Now I see where you're going. You're talking about this.
Yep.
This parcel here, right?
And if you did that,
I think that's something we could look at. Yeah.
You also then could shift the road a little bit to add the sidewalk on the north side, and so you wouldn't have to impact the apartment on the south side. The south side property would be unimpacted then. And that also may give you a little more room on the south side at Park to make a connection into that bike lane.
Yeah, that's a good point, Keith. I think that's, we were trying to avoid acquisition of that parcel. So now that we're talking about acquisition, that's something we could look at, see if we could fit a left turn pocket there.
Because especially when I see 2 sliver parts on both sides of a road, that makes me suggest that it might be cleaner to acquire one of the properties and leave the other one untouched if possible.
Sure, absolutely.
Another thing is if you're going from Mountain View, going north and you're wanting to turn onto Meadow, would we be able to use that light at Alma Plaza to do a U-turn and then come back down on this ramp to access Meadow?
You lost me there. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Alma Plaza.
So you're going northbound Alma, and what you want to do is you want to turn one of the directions.
Okay.
Right now, there's no access from northbound Alma to Meadow, either direction. Sorry, you can't turn.
Oh, right.
If instead you continued over the bridge and then did a U-turn at Alma Plaza and came back down that ramp, you now would have 2 more turning. You'd be able to turn either left or right at the bottom of the ramp, and that would now bring your 3 turning actions up to 5 right there.
Yeah, Alma Plaza is the grocery outlet, Peter, where you showed us before. Remember the other image that you showed us?
Right.
When we were looking at
it's on the upper left of the screen.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So what you're saying is somehow
one more.
Come up this.
Yeah. So.
Right. Oops.
And one more. Oh, go back.
Right there.
This is a good one, right?
This one.
And so we'd be coming here, we'd be going north, and when you hit that light, the light is almost at the top of the screen, you would have a U-turn there, U-turn lane, and come back down.
Is there a light there or up
exactly.
here?
Exactly. Right, but a little farther south, a little down a little more.
Right there.
Yeah. So if you could use that light and have a left turn lane. Now, is this off-ramp that's still not on Caltrain property. That's city property?
Yeah, this this one is tricky. The parallel ramp is essentially parallel to the right of way. I think it encroaches slightly because we developed this before we were trying to stay completely out of the right of way. But this turning, because of the turning movement here, is a little bit of encroachment. But it's hard to explain. But the right of way here is very odd because it's kinked. So this may require an adjustment. And I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah. And so,
but you're also asking if a U-turn could be made from northbound.
Yeah. So at the head of your red arrow there, if those trees are on city property, then you could make that a little wider to support a U-turn to get access that ramp.
Yeah, we didn't think about that, but that's a possibility, I suppose.
Okay. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd have to talk to Gary about that and see what the volumes are and all that good stuff.
Yeah,
okay, I've got
easier said than done.
All right, we've got Tony and then Greg, and then I'm gonna we'll go to public comment.
So sort of following up on Keith's questions, we seem to be incrementally buying or acquiring more and more slivers. And I'm wondering whether we've changed our strategy to say that these acquisitions are possible now, and should not, that constraint can be lifted a little bit more. And so to the consultant team, Nadia, I'm asking is, does that ability to acquire, for instance, the apartment building or the buildings, the two houses on the other side, do those lifting of those constraints allow a different configuration that we have not thought about? And that makes it much easier for bikes, peds, and the disabled. Because at this point, I think all of these alternatives seem to be compromised from that point, and we're sort of trying to layer it on now. But removing the constraint of acquisitions might allow other solutions that we have not considered. For instance, lifting the train up saves a lot of concrete because of the geometry of the slope of the streets. Lifting it up 2 or 3 feet or maybe 5 feet allows the geometry to be better. It certainly makes the bike ped experience much better because you're not going down into a 20-foot concrete wall on one side or on two sides. So just question about it. Does it lift constraints and allow us to other alternatives?
So if I'm hearing your question correctly, Tony, really at this point you're saying because this will also have shoe fly tracks, then are there improvements we could make on the existing hybrid even that might make this better?
Yes, that's correct, Nadia.
Yeah, I think that's possible. We haven't really revisited the hybrid, but I mean, if there's certain aspects of the hybrid that we can improve, I think that's something we can look into. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of anything in particular that acquiring, property would make things better. I just I'm not visualizing it right now, so I really can't give you a good answer on that one.
Right.
So I did
okay, we can talk about that in the technical working group, Tony. So so we can move forward.
Okay.
Yeah. Greg, did you have something?
Yeah, trying to keep an open mind. Is this option and the other partial underpass option for Charleston tied together, or are they independent? So for instance, could we build the hybrid option here, or I will say the word viaduct? I don't know, maybe not the viaduct, but could we build the hybrid option here and the partial underpass option for Charleston, or the other way around?
Yeah, we absolutely could, or vice versa. We could do a hybrid at Charleston and the underpass here, so that we could kind of mix and match. Yeah,
Okay,
and traffic-wise, they are kind of tied together.
just to add to the
We worked
combinatorial explosion of things to talk about, but I was curious if that was possible. It's interesting that it is. Thanks.
Right. As we laid out this geometry too, we worked closely with Gary in terms of, hey, Gary, if we eliminate some of these turning movements at Meadow, we're going to, you know, that'll help us save on property acquisitions. But does it even work from a traffic standpoint? So that kind of tied back to Charleston.
Yeah, because I'm concerned that this option, by cutting down so many turning movements, we're driving traffic. In one case, it was 150 cars on one of those presentations to the Charleston neighborhood. And in fact, some of those cars, it looks like they will divert through, for instance, the circles, which is not great. So I'm just trying to understand. I'm going to keep listening to understand what the advantages are of this approach. So thanks.
Okay, before I turn it over to public comment, my only question was, Peter, this assumption is that the bike ped tunnel goes down 10 feet. Is there a reason that we go down 10 feet instead of 8 feet? And does the 8 feet save you something that's notable there?
Oh, in terms of what, the vertical clearance, is that what you're referring to? I think that's what you
Yes.
showed on the exhibit.
Yeah.
That helps a little bit, but it's probably not going to be significant.
Because 2 feet seems like a lot. Well, it'll certainly help at park, right?
Yep, it'll help at park, yep.
So, I mean, that would definitely be another consideration. Okay, and then just wanted to note, the Bay Bridge bike ped path is 15.5 feet wide, and the GE path is 15.5 feet wide. So 20 feet is very generous. So, okay, I am going to turn it over to public comment. If you'd like to speak on this agenda item, if you could please raise your hand. I see one person right now. I see two, I see three. If everyone who wants to speak on this item, I'm going to give you about another minute to raise your hand. Because if we've got a lot of speakers, I have to shorten the amount of minutes. So, because otherwise we're going to run very over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. I'm going to give you each 2 minutes, and oh, now we're at 7. And I'll ask if ahead of you says something that you agree with, if you could shorten your answers by saying I agree with them, that would be great. And then I just want to remind everybody that this is the first time we're all seeing this. There will be other opportunities, including probably another view at certainly at XCAP, and then also at the town halls, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So with that,
and Nadia, we're not responding to these, right? We're just listening to the comments.
Just going to hear them out. Yep. And so, and I'll also encourage people to email your things in, because I know some of this is hard to digest, and we do recognize that not all of the renderings match the drawings right now. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Before I go to public comment, Peter, did you want to run the videos? Because the video's it's long, right?
Yeah, I could do that. I was going to save it till later, but I could do it now if you want.
Well,
it's up to you.
I have a question for Ed Shikata. Is he still here? I can't see on my gallery.
I am.
Ed? Okay, great. Sorry, I had to like scroll until I could find you.
Be active.
I wasn't sure if I'm not sure, and this is maybe a question for both Peter and Ed, is the video going to be altered to represent any of the bike ped things? And so is it worth waiting, because really it doesn't really reflect well what we're talking about, or?
Good question.
It's really showing more of how it's constructed and how the staging is developed. It's not really showing the final configuration as much.
Yeah, I think as long as you consider it a work in progress, and like everything else, it is a preview, and that it gives XCAP a sense of what we're looking at, and both to give feedback as well as to be able to visualize the concepts we're talking about.
Great. So actually, then I think we should do the video, and then we can hear public comment, so we can get everyone has the ability to comment also, even on what they saw in the video. It might help some people, might answer some questions, might raise others, but.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm probably going to let the video just do most of the talking here, but again, it's to present a potential staging scheme. First order of work would be get all the utilities out of the way of the excavation areas. And then to prepare for the excavation of the bridges, we would close these at-grade crossings, close the cross streets to traffic. And here's our traditional shoe fly. And then we could work on the west. We could start to do the excavations on the west side of the tracks. Again, that's really needed to be done first so the contractor has access to the excavation area for the bridges. Provide some detours, some temporary pavement. This is kind of an overview. It shows, we're gonna, in these next few minutes here, we're gonna be showing more detail at each cross street. So be a little bit patient here. I think this video is about 7-8 minutes long, pretty long. Yeah, so it's first showing Charleston here. And again, you're kind of seeing a duplicate because now it's just focused on the one street here. We're just showing an overview of everything. This is kind of a repeat of what you just saw. So a little bit of prep work before we start the excavation for the, well, the chute fly track's got to come in first before we begin the excavation for the railroad bridge. Also worth noting is the excavation here is going to be below groundwater. So this is going to be a somewhat complex construction procedure for dewatering and all that good stuff. So the plan here is to at least keep one lane of traffic open on Alma at all times. So the underpass is kind of going to be built in little segments, if you will, while we maintain traffic as best we can on Alma. That's kind of what this is trying to show here. So once the portion of the bridge is built, then we could shift the traffic onto that bridge and then build the rest of the underpass once the traffic gets shifted. It's coming up here shortly. Yeah, so traffic gets shifted onto the newly built bridge. And now that segment between those two areas gets built. This green color here is showing for the ped bike access.
Here is for Alto.
So that was Charleston, and this is just a close-up of Meadow. And this is all done simultaneously. This can be done together or separately, depending on how we want to handle the traffic. Obviously, if it's done simultaneously, then the construction gets done more quickly. Again, this is just a very similar scheme at Meadow. Once the shoe fly is in place, then we can begin excavation for the railroad bridge. After the railroad bridge is built, put traffic back, train traffic back on that, and then we can start the construction of the underpass in segments. I think we're almost done here, maybe another minute or so. Again, just to reiterate it here real quick, we're trying to maintain at least one lane of traffic on Alma at all times. And this is just one scheme too. The contractor could potentially decide to do it a different way and consult with the city to do it a little bit differently. And there's probably many ways you could do it. Okay, that was it.
I would just add the commentary that similar to animations we've seen previously, I think some of the public reaction has been that's way too fast, too much information for folks to absorb. So as we think about iterations on the animations and how it would be prepared for town halls, especially the virtual town halls, then we've talked about how we could narrate and allow people to slow it down and have it be more easily interpreted. And think about the appropriate narration so that it's clearer to the public what they're seeing.
Peter, quick question. Is there a continual shoe fly track between Meadow and Charleston?
Yeah, our rail engineers try to look at if we could just do a shoe fly just at Meadow or just at Charleston, and there's not enough distance between the two. So it'd be a single shoe fly to handle the construction of each.
All right, thank you.
Peter, how does that square though with the fact that you suggested that you might be able to do one alternative at one and for example, a hybrid in another if the shoe flies are different? Because I think the other shoe flies encroach further into Alma, don't they?
Right. So the shoe fly length might have to get lengthened, I think is what you're getting at.
Well, I thought that there was some
alternatives.
There's some alternatives where the shoe fly encroaches much further into Alma. And I thought you said that on the partial underpasses, Alma is able to stay open the entire time. And so I'm just wondering, when you said before in response to Greg Braille about whether we can mix and match, for example, have a partial underpass at Charleston and a hybrid at Meadow, is that true from the way the shoe fly tracks work? Was that maybe, did you respond a little maybe too quickly because we might have to consider the shoe fly option, or are we sure about that? Just a question.
I think what you're talking about is the shoe fly for the tunnel or the trench, if I'm not mistaken. I think the shoe fly for this or for the hybrid would be virtually identical. I'd have to check with our rail engineer on that, but I know the shoe fly for the tunnel swings way out into Alma.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not talking anything like that.
I thought I heard Millette trying to say something. Millette?
This was Eddie.
Oh, Eddie. Yeah.
Right. Again, we'd have to check the geometry, but you know, we would look at, you know, a single shoe fly or, you know, what do you call it, staggering the shoe flies like we had in one of our alternatives.
Okay.
I'm not sure if this is a real appropriate time, but I heard shoe flies being discussed, so it's probably a great time for me to bring up shoe fly because we got a response from Caltrain regarding shoe fly, a question that I had asked that we were waiting for a response on. So Sarah actually has already added this to our to the uploads on the website under tonight's meeting information that's shared. But the question that I had that had been unanswered until this week was, lastly, what would it take for Caltrain to say no shoe fly is needed, or that some other construction method would be considered or allowed? And Caltrain's response is, in order to make a determination, Caltrain would need more information on construction sequencing so as to understand associated operating impacts in detail. I'm going to skip some of this, but I'll try and catch the key points because it's fairly lengthy. But decisions related to whether or not Caltrain would accept certain operational impacts to accommodate the construction of a specific local project are ultimately a system-wide policy issue. In terms of construction sequencing, Caltrain would need to examine designs and construction phasing plans, approximately 15% or conceptual planning phase. Part of Caltrain's design review would also focus on the ability of the project to build abutments and drive piles within a safe distance from electrified system components. Also of note is that Caltrain staff believes that such construction scenarios will likely take longer to build, while construction in an electrified environment will introduce more complexity. In advance of reviewing a detailed proposal, Caltrain staff generally believes that there is a low probability that such a request would be approved. Should the city decide to provide the level of design detail needed for Caltrain to undertake a more detailed review, the city and railroad would need to discuss the substantial level of effort needed to review such a request and the associated agreements and funding commitments that would be required. In the absence of a required design detail or a formal review, the default answer to such a question would be no. At early stages of project development, when many alternatives are being considered and detailed review by the railroad has yet to occur, we generally encourage communities to adhere to established railroad standards and construction methodologies as they develop concepts and alternatives. While this is a conservative approach, doing anything less heightens the risk that project impacts or cost may be understated at this early stage, and that decisions may be made based on overly optimistic assumptions. There's just a little bit more text in this, but I won't read the whole thing, but it's all posted to the website under shared with this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Okay, so I do have to go to the public, and thank you, public members, for waiting. And in the interest of time, I am going to ask you guys to keep your comments to 1 minute because we still have to review the schedule going forward. And I want to be sure that we have time to have a little bit of a conversation on that. So I really apologize. I know I had promised you 2 minutes before, but there was just a lot more information. And again, this is not the first time we're going to discuss this, so we will have other opportunities. So I really appreciate your patience. So Ruchika, I'll let you take it.
Right, thank you, Chair. Our first speaker is Penny Elson. You are allowed to talk now, so feel free to unmute yourself and you can begin now.
Thanks, Ruchika. So one of my questions is, could we look at the intersection of Park and East Meadow again, please? A question that I have is, I ride the Park Bike Boulevard frequently, and we teach kids, this is a school commute route, we teach kids in our schools to never ride wrong way. It's one of the top reasons people are killed by cars in Palo Alto riding bikes. So we don't ever ride wrong way. My question is, if I'm going southbound on Park and I want to go left on East Meadow, how do I do that? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yep, we can hear you, Penny. We just can't answer you during public comment.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, all right.
Is there anything else? And we'll try to get them to answer your question at the end.
I will just say it's disappointing that we're doing cars first and all the other modes of transportation last, because when bicyclists and sidewalks get whatever's left over, it usually isn't very good.
Thank you, Penny. Okay, our next speaker is Elizabeth.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, so very quickly, you know my feelings on all the pedestrian things. I think one thing I would add is to really take seriously the idea on both Meadow and Charleston of thinking of part of the project as extending those two-way bike paths all the way to Mitchell Park. I am really concerned about the lane that's dipping down the right to the northbound Alma from Meadow. I think that creates really difficult things with the pedestrian. I think it's a lot of concrete. I understand it has other impacts, but I'd be really interested in looking at the best version of the project where you don't have to dip down. My final thing is that I think for these turns that are not being directly accommodated, it would be really useful to have some context as to the quantity of these, the number of them, to kind of understand what might be the impact on the neighborhoods. I also think that we need to assume that everybody will find a way to do those. And so finding something that may not be optimal, but is better than making U-turns in people's driveways, we should probably be considering those.
Our next speaker is Peggy Kraft. Feel free to unmute and begin to talk now.
Thank you. I just had a couple statements, and obviously you can't answer, but I'm curious if anybody's addressing what happens if and when Caltrains decides to put 4 tracks in Palo Alto. I know that's something that's being discussed, and how will that impact all of this? Because I'm not sure how that works. And then I think that what happens on East Meadow definitely impacts Charleston, West Charleston, and East Charleston. So I think the 2 intersections have to be considered together, because whatever you do where you stop traffic from being able to go in one direction or another will impact the other. So I think, in my opinion, Charleston with the roundabout is going to take a huge traffic impact, because you're going to force all the people that are going that want to go west on East Charleston, they're going to be forced onto West Charleston and the big roundabout, which is also going to take property away from people. But anyway, those were the main just points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sandeep Bhair.
Hello, I have a very similar comment to Peggy, which was, we're not considering what will happen when high-speed rail comes and we'll need 4 tracks. So I think we should look at all these options, scaling to when high-speed rail comes and there are 4 tracks, as well as the fact that high-speed rail will make more noise. So I think I think in that case, we might find that the trench option might be preferred. The second point I wanted to make is the right turn from Charleston to Alma looks like the right turn from Page Mill to Alma, which, you know, if you've been on that, no, it isn't really a good ramp. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Drew.
Hello. First, thank you so much for just all the effort over the months to get the alternate proposal to this level, and then the discussion and some of the members' comments. I think it flushes out that there are some sub options that could be potential, because if you have to build a shoe fly track, then it's definitely possible to raise the main line up a few feet. And if you raise the main line up a few feet, that shortens the retaining walls that are needed. You might even avoid the apartment building take if you can get the downward slope farther in and stuff. And it allows some other options that may ultimately optimize out better. And then I also look at this, I would advocate for a left turn pocket there below Alma, because I view this as kind of a split diamond. Meadow is the northbound part and Charleston is the southbound part, and kind of together they can function as one unit, and might avoid the roundabout as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is someone with the screen name of KWB.
Hi. Yeah, thank you all as well. And I think it's great that the bike lanes are all protected from the cars. I wondered if you had considered having 2 bike lanes, 1 in each direction, so you don't have this crossover problem. Another comment I wanted to make was that when I'm a little confused as whether it's a 10-foot rise or a 20-foot rise, but I want to make sure that you consider that it's children doing that and not adults on, a bike with lots of gears or, more expert bikers. And to consider, having since it's bikes and pedestrians, do what they did at Homer and separate the pedestrians from the bikes, because that seems like that could cause problems. Thank you. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention was the structure looks like a graffiti magnet, so that's a worry to me.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Khurshid Gandhi.
Hello, I assume you guys can hear me. This is Khurshid Gandhi, and I'm not an expert on looking at diagrams such as these. I live on West Meadow, and from what I've been trying to understand and listen to, trying to understand that we only have 3 out of the 8 turning options on Meadow is starting to make me feel kind of trapped. Even the stay-at-home order hasn't made me feel so trapped as this. I'm just trying to imagine me going to grocery outlet in the car, and instead of a quarter mile or less, I might be having to travel 2 miles. Ecologically, that doesn't sound right. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is I don't think this is increasing connectivity in Palo Alto. It seems to be very choppy. It seems to be breaking up our streets and isolating neighborhoods. Number 3, I'll just piggyback on what KWB said. Every time you have slopes for bike lanes and pedestrians and older bikers and very little kids are going to have trouble biking there. So just take those into consideration, please. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Karen Kalinsky.
Hi, I just wanted to add a bit of information that I looked into how many apartments are in the building that's at the corner of Alma and East Meadow, and it's 14 apartments. And I applaud the ex-cappers for trying to think of solutions that if that property is taken, and given that the thruway only needs 10% of that land, that we come up with some way to help find housing for those displaced families. Thank you.
That concludes our public speakers.
Right, thank you. Okay, well, a big thanks to the AECOM team and to Gary Black for hanging around for helping us do these. I know we're going to discuss these further, and we're going to be doing item number 5 next, which is the work plan schedule. So we'll talk about how that's going to come up in the future, but it will be back. So thank you to everybody for participating. And with that, we'll move to number 5. Philip, I'll turn it over to you first so you can talk through the schedule and then update us on anything since the last time we spoke. Philip, you there?
Yeah, thanks. Of course. Typical issues trying to get things unmuted here. Let me try and see if I can share my screen to get this thing up here. No, I can't seem to do it. It's not giving me, oh, I gotta show all my windows. I've got too many windows open. Well, it's not letting me do it. Well, unfortunately, I cannot share my window, so I'll just talk through it here. So we've adjusted the...
I can share my screen, Philip, if that helps.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you much.
All right, let's do that.
That'd be very helpful. So we've adjusted the estimated schedule and work plan, which is really primarily reflective of the comments that we've heard, you know, in the last meeting, or I should say last 2 meetings, as we've discussed this. And oh, of course I don't have it open. And the key things that have been adjusted is, when the XCAP meets, moving forward, when the XCAP deliberates on the alternatives, and the town hall has been shifted. So we've got the town hall starting sometime later in June, and the XCAP estimated remaining work shifting on through July and into August, and bringing back for some council deliberations in August.
So I can.
Thank you, and I see it's up on your screen now too. Sorry, I was trying to look on my screen.
Yeah, no worries. Probably the thing to note is that we are, as you heard, the technical working group met to review the first attempt at the Meadow Charleston new concept. We are trying to have a second meeting to kind of make sure that we've got the very best version of those before we were to do any virtual town halls. So the virtual town halls right now, I think they're on the next, where's the town hall? I think it's on this part. Here it is. The town halls are currently sort of late June, early July. And that's really kind of dependent on when we're able to get this technical working group meeting. But for ex-cappers, the important thing is on our main agenda, you see we have a meeting on June 3rd and another one June 17th. But when we start to get into, and then we have a bit of a break, and that break is intended so that the town halls can happen. That may shift a little bit if the timeline shifts. But once we get into July and August, I did want to note that once we're doing deliberations, we're going to try to deliberate, like let's say we start with deliberating the Churchill alternative. I'd like to try to do it weekly at that point so that we can have the momentum of the conversation not be broken up by a 2-week gap, because I think that'll just take us forever. And I think, nobody is as motivated as all of us to kind of get through this. I did want to also reiterate that we of course are sensitive to what's happening with COVID and the fact that transit ridership is not happening right now. But these are all long-term plans, and that the city has struggled with for years. And even though we may come to some sort of recommendation that the council may or may not move on in the immediate term, it's still something that they will need this work for later. So the XCAP's work to at least continue and write a report and capture all of the work that we've done and the analysis that we've done and the understanding that we now have of these intersections and the bike ped stuff still remains very important. And so we are continuing to try to work towards a schedule to have it done by the first week of September, or actually the last week of August is what we have on here. And you'll see on there, we tried to, the top half sort of estimates how many meetings we think we might need for deliberations. Of course, they may change, if we magically all agree, this might be shorter. But just trying to allow enough time to continue to have some robust conversation, and continuing to highlight that, we are being asked with the limited information that's available and with just a very early level of design to give our recommendations for what needs to be studied further. It is not a final decision. And, a lot of these bike ped things, we're going to, certainly for the new alternatives, we need to flesh them out further. But, there's still a lot of open questions, and those will remain, unfortunately. And so we are tasked with trying to make these decisions or these recommendations with very limited information. So I just want to remind everybody who's watching or who may be new to this, understanding that while we'd all like much, the very final detail of how exactly everything is going to connect perfectly, a lot of this is dependent on, if they open up the ground and they have problem moving the utilities, or something is not where we thought it was on a map, that could also influence some of these design things. And those are things that'll have to go, when they go deeper into design, we'll find those. Okay, Philip, did you have anything else to add, or?
No, I'm not sure. I mean, I think we see some raised hands for questions. So
yep,
maybe...
I was going to go to those. So Greg and then Tony.
Yeah, I'm just, if we're going to continue deliberating till September, that makes that July and August period really, really critical for us all to be in the meeting. I think I know the answer, but do we anticipate that we'll continue to be able to have virtual meetings through the end of September, or is California going to return to the previous state of the affairs before then, and we're all going to have to go in person?
I think for safety, we're going to assume that it's going to have to be virtual, which I have to tell you is not my favorite way to deliberate. I'd much rather be in a room. And if there's, if there's some sort of shift where we could do social distancing, who knows?
Because
But
once
that's
upon a
still-
time, yeah.
I just want to say that's still to be determined because this is an exemption or some kind of sort of special allowance for the Brown Act.
Yeah.
So that's to be seen whether they're going to let us get back together to start meeting and what the rules for that would be.
I would normally think having the most important part of our 2 years of effort be in the summer when people go on vacation would be a terrible idea. But this summer, I'm not going anywhere, and I don't know if anyone else is either. So,
yeah, we've had a similar discussion about the timing of the town halls and whether people, would have more interest. Perhaps maybe this could be an entertainment factor for people that have been locked in the house to travel virtually to a town hall.
yeah, maybe. Okay, thanks.
Tony?
Well, the question is, we've actually, it's an observation. We've got a lot of good information now through these months of looking at this project. And so at least our consultant team probably has some solutions that the public have brought up. For instance, bikes and peds need a better priority. And so it might change some of the ways in which we're looking at alternatives, or it might change the alternatives. And I'm wondering if we have time allocated in this schedule to allow that to happen now that we have a lot more information in our heads.
So if I think I understand you correctly, so what the goal is to have the new alternatives, meaning the partial underpass at Churchill and the partial underpass at Meadow Charleston, be refined to the level of the sort of original alternatives, the trench, the hybrid, the viaduct. And that includes having cost estimates. It includes having a construction rendering, and it includes having an estimate of certainly the cost, but also the time. Did I say that already? I'm sorry, it's been a long meeting at this point. And
Everything
so,
goes into the fact sheet, Nadia.
exactly, thank you. That's and once all of those are completed, then that would go to the town halls and we would deliberate on that. And it may be that, I think today we got this new concept that we might, for example, look at Meadow and Charleston and might have to mix and match. Haven't really thought about how that might change our deliberations. But I think we do have a lot of good information, but it should all be to the same level of completion so that when we start to deliberate, we've got everything that we need. Did that answer it, Tony?
No, it doesn't. It gives me a good lot of good information, but it didn't answer the question. I think what the mix and match might be between alternatives, it could be something prime. It might be a completely different alternatives now that we've lifted some of these constraints or are willing to compromise some constraints compared with others. We might come up with an alternative that's different. And what I'm hearing is that we will continue to push these 3 or 4 different categories of alternatives separately. And I think there are mergers between ideas that might help alleviate some of the issues that are brought up by the residents and XCAP members.
Okay, so I think specifically what you raised earlier was the potential for raising the tracks a bit on the existing alternatives to make it more of a hybrid-y type thing. And I think what you heard Peter DeStefano respond was the hybrid is the best hybrid they could make without property impacts. And even if you were able to take property, he doesn't know how it would be improved. So I guess really the onus would be on if you felt strongly that there's some other alternative that we've missed, you'd have to kind of bring that forward. But at this stage, I think we've got, I think we've got the general concepts, and we could put in as many details and caveats about, well, if you did this, this might also happen. But at this level of design, I don't know how much more they're going to change.
So I think we have the tools and the understanding, but I don't think any of the alternatives are good alternatives. I think we have to choose between the least worst.
No.
And And so I think we need to polish them once we get to the residents who we're asking to pay for this thing, to have some benefit. And I think the benefit is bikes and much better focus on bikes and peds, but there may be others, and there may be better configurations than the ones that were looked at. So I wouldn't constrain it just to these alternatives. I would ask our consultants to see if there are others now that they know Palo Alto a lot better.
Okay, we can, I think when we have our technical working group meeting, we can discuss that further, because we also are running up against a budget issue. I mean, it's not a surprise that with COVID, we have some really serious budget constraints. So part of this is also not necessarily churning up significant more consultant time. So it's going to be a balance, and we'll have to work with city staff and frankly, the city council to understand if we have the leeway to do that, or if we're going to be asked to call it with what we have. So I hear you.
Thank you, Nadia. You took the words right out of my mouth. Appreciate you raising that issue.
Okay, I see Larry. I think Larry's attempting to unmute himself.
I am.
There you go.
Well, I respect what Tony had to say, but you reach a point where you have to make a decision. And a lot of times decisions in all types of areas are made with incomplete knowledge. And that there may be some great idea out there, I guess is always a possibility. But I think we have to decide on what we have before us and move on, and not expect that we're going to come up with something that, or that if we only study this for another 6 months, a year, 2 years, that somehow or other the perfect solution is going to come along. I don't think that's realistic, and this is not the end of the process. If somehow or other somebody comes up with some incredible solution a year from now, well, then we'd all ask the then city council to reconsider. But I also want to point out, it's sort of interesting that we're talking about this today, the day after the BART extension to Santa Clara County is finally coming to fruition. You read the stories today. Here they are, they're going to open the station in June of 2020. And they first started talking about this in 2010. That's what we're talking about here too. I think that this isn't going to open. Some of the comments made by members of the public were along the lines of, oh my God, this is going to happen tomorrow. Well, it's not going to happen tomorrow, and it's not going to happen next year. So there's a lot more work to be done as we move down the line, but we have to start moving down the line and not expect that there's a perfect solution out there somewhere if we only could keep looking. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any other XCAP members who wanted to speak on this before I go to public comment? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move it to public comment, and then we'll bring it back.
We have one member of the public. Our speaker would be Drew. Please feel free to unmute, and you can begin to talk now.
Hello there. I wasn't going to speak, but just hearing some of the comments now, I do think there's not to create brand new alternatives, but the fact that shoe-fly track needs to be built, it appears on this these new alternatives, being able to raise the tracks and being able to just, that's some engineers just thinking about the tweaks that would do, that to not need to take the apartment building because the vertical elevation for the driveway potentially becomes less of a problem, less retaining walls, the water table. There are a few things, like a tweak to any one of the designs that's a tweak but significant that could change something. I do think that that's something that should be discussed by the XCAP as part of their deliberations, and can be part of the presentation that's done out of it, that here's alternative and here's a tweak that we recommend because it solves these problems and stuff, without a brand new alternative, but there are tweaks to what you have. Thank you.
Thank you. We do not have any other speakers at this time.
Great, thank you for that. And I just wanted to say, yeah, echoing what Drew just sort of mentioned, the way I've been, and Larry and I have been thinking about this, is that basically we have a decision to make, for example, at Charleston. You know, do we want a trench? Do we want a viaduct? Do we want a hybrid? Or do we want this partial underpass? And do we want it to take it to the next level of study? It's not that it's the final, it's just that we have to tell city council that we think this one has the best shot or has the best potential support, frankly, from the community, and has the most potential success in terms of figuring out how to fund it. And that is going to be the challenge that we're faced with. And so it's not going to be easy. And we are going to have to put in as many caveats as we can. Okay, if we choose this one, I personally see it as it's quite possible that we make some suggestion and the city council chooses something different. And so the way I envision writing this report is making sure that, you know, if we recommended that they did a viaduct and they chose a hybrid, that we said, well, we didn't choose the hybrid for the following reasons. So as much as we can, putting in there the pros and cons of all of them will help the next, you know, set of folks who has to look at this report, because it, you know, now with COVID, it's more likely that this is not necessarily going to be done in the super short term. But if it sits for 10 years or 5 years, if someone picks it up in 5 years, they can follow along in the conversation really well. And so the report writing is going to be pretty critical to what we're getting done here. Philip, I don't think we need to move the schedule because, for XCAP to approve the schedule, because as we know, there's definitely at least going to be a change potentially in terms of when the technical working group meeting, right? So this is more just informational for everybody.
Yeah, I would say this is not necessarily an action needed on this item, but just note that this is more or less what we'd intend to take to council when we take our items to council, along with the, yeah.
Great. And as a reminder, our next XCAP meeting will be June 3rd. At that, I am going to be giving the XCAP's update to council on June 8th. Is that still correct, Philip? Or is that still coming to council on the 8th?
Yeah, I think we've got the June 8th meeting circled with a potential of June 15th, but I think June 8th is our target currently.
I see Ed sort of nodding, which gives me some confidence.
Planning on June 8th.
Okay, all right, great. And so at that time, there's probably going to be a discussion. I know that the AECOM contract extension is going to be coming up, so there will maybe also be some guidance from council in terms of what is available or what may not be available for the future of XCAP. So something to follow along with for those of you who are following that part of the conversation.
Yeah, on that point, Nadia, I believe we're trying to get both the contract and your XCAP update on the same agenda, just so it's simpler for folks who are tracking the issues.
Yeah, great. Okay, so with that, I will just move to XCAP member updates and working group updates. I know we're way over time, but we've still got 26 people hanging in there. So if you've got an update, or Megan, if you wanted to say, I know you've been holding something for a long time, so if you wanted to throw that out there, here's your last shot to give us your wisdom before you head off to DC to get us stimulus money. Haha.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering whether, maybe from staff's perspective, whether the bike and pedestrian options at Churchill, the ones, because a lot of them do use that Caltrain right of way in order to make the ramps and stuff. And I was wondering what the thinking was about whether or not those will be permissible by Caltrain.
Well, I think there's quite a few unknowns in that, similar to the other right-of-way requests. They're going to be requests, and they're going to be things that we will have to determine, frankly, at a point further down the road. Hesitate to get into this, but this is a whole other possible discussion that we could have about where we currently are in the process and where some of these decisions will need to happen, which frankly, from Caltrain's email, you heard it from them that some of these decisions won't be able to be made until we get it to a further point in the process. So I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question. That said, I anticipate that that they will be amenable to us, requesting a bike ped access. I just don't know if that specific one would be the one, or if we would have to design around that right away access there.
Yeah, I guess I just was thinking it might be worth asking them since you seem to have a pretty open dialogue with them right now. I think that might be helpful. And that was my only question. And I just wanted to say that it's been wonderful to work on this project with you all. And I wish you the best of luck as you make this decision. And I'm proud of all the work that everyone has done to get us to this point.
Thank you, Megan.
Well, Megan, if I could just comment on behalf of the city, your contributions have been extraordinary, including teaching all of us, including city council members, how to do sort of a ranking matrix, which is just mind-bending, and we'll miss you. So, but stay in touch because we may lean on you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else have a member update or wants to talk about what's going on with you guys with COVID and how is X-capping and the schedule going to be like for you guys over the summer? Is anyone planning a big vacation that we should know about and we might need to put into the schedule? That would be a good thing to know.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm very serious.
No, I mean, I had that trip to Greece and the Balkans, but that got scrubbed a long time ago. That was all of May.
This probably falls under staff updates, but I'm going to be in Bali starting on the 28th. So unfortunately, I won't make your next meeting. The Bali thing's a joke, actually. Sadly, I'll be having surgery to repair some issues I have with a blood clot. So unfortunately, I will not be here at the next meeting. And that's, yeah, that's not a great update, but staff update.
Well, we wish you well in Bali or wherever you're going to be, Philip.
Stanford Hospital, but hopefully the medication will make me think it's Bali.
It's a great way to get a coronavirus test for free.
Yeah. And there's a Zoom background that can make you feel like you're in Bali. I'll just say that.
Nadia, I have to leave for another meeting.
Thank you. Okay, Tony, go ahead. I wanted to check in with those who have children to just, I don't really know. I've got older kids, so I'm not really following what's happening for the summer, but how does having kids and deliberating for XCAP, how does that all sound to those who have younger parents? I'm looking at Dave and Greg and I think Carrie as well.
I just have become really good at using the stop video button, so I think it's cool. I mean, really, it's 3-hour meetings are really hard, to be completely honest, especially because it goes right through and puts all the caretaking over dinner time on my husband. But you know, it's not anything that I would want to stop our progress on. I'm happy to participate.
Would an earlier meeting, I mean, if at some point during deliberations it gets to be a real thing, then maybe we can think about even starting earlier. I don't know how that works for everybody, but you know, it could be 3:30 or 3, so it doesn't go quite so far into dinner time if that's better.
Yeah, well, I don't have to get here from work. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I don't have to get here from work anymore. So it's honestly, you know, we could have it at 9 as far as I'm concerned. I'm fortunate that my wife takes care of the kids during this time.
Oh, so we might want to ask her.
Right. She'd probably prefer if it was over before 7.
Yeah. Dave?
Yeah, if we had flexibility on time, you feel free to do a poll about that, but that would be super helpful from my perspective.
Okay, maybe Philip, we could ask Sarah. Maybe she might be able to help us do a doodle poll going forward and see what the preference is. That would be great.
Yeah, that sounds great. Maybe we'll talk offline. We can set some times for the doodle poll.
Yep. Dave?
I've got pretty young kids at elementary age, so it's been, I'd say, pretty hellish keeping them focused on and not distracted when they're on the computer doing online public school. So I've actually had zero time, like negative time, to contribute at all. You and I have talked a little about that. But school's over, first week of June-ish. We'll see how, in the absence of school, what the time is. It's probably going to be better. There won't be summer camp, unfortunately, probably not. But probably should also note that school will start up on August 13th, right? So it's a little bit, it's 2 weeks before your schedule ends. So that's something we want to consider too, is all of a sudden I'm back in stress mode if we're still doing online school.
Okay, good to know. That's
yeah.
helpful. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
not sounding, well, it depends on the age, but for the elementary kids, at least, they're trying really hard not to make it online school in August, because we have now conclusively proven that for young elementary school kids, online school does not work.
Okay. All right. So we'll keep that in mind in terms of the schedule. All right. Thank you guys for hanging in there. That's all. We have some staff update is also on the agenda, but I don't think we have anything, right? Philip, Ed, is there anything we missed?
I cut in on mine under this item, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Ed, there's nothing?
Nothing new. We're good.
All right, perfect. We're all released. Thank you so much for hanging in there. And sorry it was so long, but it was great. Thank you.
Take care. All.
See you on
Bye.
the 3rd. Bye.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Office of
Yeah,
Transportation.
good luck, Megan.
Thank
Yes.
you all.
Good luck, Megan. Bye.